welcome to the future. Otherwise known as episode 31 of tomorrow's World Audit Time. Evening, Mark.
Evening, Russ. How are you?
Oh, splendid, Mark. I've just had a beautiful month off recovering from that epic episode 30. You know, good to recharge the batteries. And
I think I managed to finally expunge all the latent hail and pace out of my body.
Who knows? They might make a comeback in a future episode.
Of course, if people are very, very unlucky, yeah, definitely.
Back to normal this episode, and obviously we like to roam around the timeline a bit, so we decided to do quite an early episode this time. I was wondering what we could base it on, and then I realised that, weirdly, completely unannounced this year, it was the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War, the signing of the Paris Peace Accords. And I'd not seen or heard anything about it at all. And it's quite a, we heard plenty about VE Day when that was 50 years old, didn't we? And but not a peep out of the Americans about the end of the Vietnam War. What date was it? It was the 27th of January 1973. Old Nixon signed on the dotted line there.
Yeah, I suppose probably because for a lot of people the war still continued for another 2 years. I actually had to say I hadn't realised either. Yeah, until you pointed it out, and it was and equally this episode was only a few weeks after Nixon was re-elected. Well, he was inaugurated for a second time, yes, so it was quite a busy few weeks in America.
Well, and also 2 days after Nixon was sworn in, Lyndon B. Johnson died as well.
Oh, of course, yeah. I forgot about that.
Yeah. Do you reckon Nixon had him bumped off?
Yeah, I do. Actually, yeah. It's not in any of the books I've read about him, but now that you say it, I think it's highly likely. Yeah. No. I wouldn't put it past him, Russell.
But your favourite subject, Mark?
What, Nixon?
Nixon?
Yeah. Can you be a Nixologist?
Yeah, you're Nixologist. That's good.
Nixologist, yeah. I did have some thoughts because I think, I know I've spoken to this. Maybe I've bored you about this before, but to me, one of the most astonishingly kind of unreported and unconsidered facts about Richard Nixon was that how he literally committed treason before the 1968 presidential election. And this is tied in with Vietnam as well. The 1973 Paris peace talks were not the first Paris peace talks in the Vietnam War. There was a similar set of talks going on in 1968 before the presidential election. LBJ famously obviously decided, announced on television that he was not going to seek the Democratic nomination to be the presidency, to be the president. He hadn't won an election, so had he gone for the nomination, he likely would have won, and he could have served a total of 10 years, because obviously he was president only because he was the vice president when Kennedy died. But he decided he was not going to do it, in part because he wanted to spend his time devoted to seeking peace in Vietnam. I think he felt like the Vietnam War was a bit of a Democratic Party, a stain in the Democratic Party and a stain in America, I suppose, in a sense. It was Kennedy started it. He felt like he had to continue it. And he thought he could gift the next president peace, and that no one would have to die, and that, it was kind of wrapped up under the watch of the two people who brought it in. And they started the peace talks, and by all accounts, they were going incredibly successfully. The South and the North were discussing them. They were making compromises. After the summer, when the two candidates were announced, Nixon for the Republicans and Humphrey for the Democrats, LBJ was obviously briefing them. And we know this because LBJ was the first person to have recording equipment in the White House. Nixon loved the idea, so decided to keep it all and make it bigger, and that really worked out well for him. But LBJ, there's always the famous conversations of him kind of talking to his tailor, where he's chatting about, he's not chatting, he's getting angry because his penis, I think he basically says his cock doesn't fit and stuff like that. And you hear him, he's talking to Humphrey, who was favourite to win the election, and he's talking to Nixon, talking about how the peace talks are going, obviously letting them in on really what's happening. And Nixon was incredibly supportive of LBJ as president and of the peace talks, and he was talking about how he really valued the updates, and he really hoped that LBJ could pull this off. Regardless of what it did for Nixon, he hoped LBJ could pull it off, for America, for the values we all hold dear, for the red, white, and blue, Russ. For all these wonderful patriotic reasons. And what LBJ discovered was that, despite all this, Nixon had decided that because he was running on an anti-war campaign, that there being no war was not conducive to electoral success. So
It's totally logical, Mark. It's totally logical.
Russ, do you see me disagree with his logic? So he decided that he would, through an interlocutor, let it be known to the South that if they politely decided to tank the peace talks, they would get a better deal if Nixon was the president in January 69 than if LBJ was in 68, which is obviously incredibly illegal. It is actually treasonous. LBJ discovered it, discussed this with Humphrey, the Democratic candidate, and they both decided they could do nothing about it.
Really?
Partly because it involved admitting that they were spying on South Vietnam, because that's how they learned about it. They learned about South Vietnam discussing this kind of... They put two and two together to get four, obviously, and they discovered, they traced it back to this kind of... It was this kind of wealthy woman. She was Vietnamese herself, but I think she lived in Paris. She was really wealthy and like kind of the kind of networker who kind of knows everyone, and that, they worked it back to Nixon. And they decided to sit in it, and they didn't do anything. And so when the peace talks did fall apart before the election in October, I think that year, which I think is one of those October surprises that really people start kind of talking about as part of the rhythm of an election campaign, they knew they had fallen apart not because of genuine disagreements between the two parties, but because of Nixon politicking. And of course, come January 1969, when he is elected, and, narrowly, a tiny percentage different, he's narrowly elected, he absolutely delivers on his word and brings peace at the kind of terms that the South would have, couldn't believe, I think. Alternatively, he may well have decided to secretly bomb Cambodia and Laos for 4 years, killing another 1 million people, elongating the war by at least half a decade, if not more. Yeah. Absolutely incredible. And it's like, everyone focuses on Watergate because it is obviously, up until Trump, Watergate was just this incredible moment, this incredible cleavage, where like, kind of American society and politics is kind of, is rent into two different paths. There's the path that could have been and the path that was. And like a lot of people talk about how American innocence was basically destroyed, this idea that they had this kind of really soft kind of focus image of their own country and the values that they could espouse and the worth they brought the world was destroyed, partly because of Watergate, partly because of the idea that, oh my God, even our politicians could be corrupt, but then also because the Vietnam War simply would not finish. No. And more senseless deaths were being delivered through the newspaper into their houses every single day. And it was all Nixon, astonishingly. And it genuinely, it's one of those things where, like, when I tell people this, they're always, they just don't believe it. No. It's like, it's so far-fetched, and it's all true.
I'll tell you what, Mark, the more I hear about this Richard Nixon guy, the more he sounds like a real piece of work.
Oh, I do love him though, Russ.
Yeah.
Whenever I read a new book about him, I just think, I just think about the screaming that must have happened in his head every single day.
Unlike the US government themselves, but I don't want us to get too bogged down in Vietnam War, but there are a couple of things that I thought I'd do a little bit of research, and I thought, I know what will be interesting and related to our podcast. I think probably one of the positive things about wars, if there is anything positive, is that they tend to foster creativity and invention. You can name all sorts of things that came out of the Second World War. And so I thought, I'll make a list of all of the interesting inventions that came out of the Vietnam War.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. Great idea, isn't it? Yeah.
No, you're pleased with yourself, right?
Well, I hunted high and low.
Yeah.
And it turns out that almost everything had already been invented in World War II. Like practically everything, even things that you massively associate with Vietnam, like Agent Orange, World War II, or super glue, invented in 1942 by mistake by some fella who was trying to make a new thing for fixing lenses. So, I mean, super glue was used and obviously extensively in Vietnam to close up injuries, but it wasn't invented for Vietnam. So I was looking for things that actually were invented specifically during the Vietnam War, for the Vietnam War, and I found a sum total of 2 things, Mark.
Okay.
The laser-guided bomb, known at the time as the paveway, and packaged salads. And that's it. Absolutely everything else is just a slight development or reuse of something that had already been invented before, primarily in World War II. I mean, you could say helicopter warfare, but I mean that's just using a helicopter that's already been invented.
The
Navy SEALs, they came about, but you don't invent a regiment, do you? It's not really technological innovation. So yeah, that's it. Vietnam completely spanked by World War II in those stakes, in terms of innovation. Quite disappointed by that. But then I thought Vietnam. What you can say, and a lot of people always say, Vietnam had the best tunes.
Yeah, best soundtrack.
And I think we all agree. Vietnam definitely beats World War II. Creedence Clearwater Revival certainly beats old, what's her name?
Vera Lynn.
Vera Lynn, yeah. I know what I'd rather listen to. So that's 1-1. Then I thought,
what's the
decider?
Yep.
It's got to be movies, Mark. Movies.
Oh, of course. Movies about or movies during? Said made during.
So I was thinking,
okay.
I could think of loads of great Vietnam films. I can think loads of great World War II films. This is going to be a really closely run thing. So, selection of World War II films. Casablanca, Dam Busters, Bridge on the River Kwai, Ice Cold in Alex, Guns of Navarone, Great Escape, 633 Squadron, Sound of Music, Dirty Dozen, Where the Eagles Dare, Battle of Britain, Patton, Eagle Has Landed, Bridge Too Far, Das Boat, Escape to Victory, Merry Christmas Mr. Lawrence, Empire of the Sun, Schindler's List, English Patient, Saving Private Ryan, Thin Red Line, Enemy at the Gates, The Pianist, Downfall, Flags of Our Fathers, Letters from Iwo Jima, Inglourious Bastards, Fury, Dunkirk, Jojo Rabbit. And that's just those are just some favourites I picked out. There's obviously many, many more. Vietnam, not as many, not nearly as many. The only ones I could see really, Green Berets, Deer Hunter, Apocalypse Now, Platoon, Full Metal Jacket, Good Morning Vietnam, Born on the 4th of July, Air America, Flight of the Intruder, Forrest Gump, Tigerland. There's some good ones in there, but I think World War II is definitely winning in terms of volume. So then I thought, okay, we need to do this scientifically. So what I did is I looked up the Oscars, Mark. I looked up the Academy Awards. Which war has won the most? I looked up Best Director and Best Film.
Okay, no, not actor or script or anything like that. So Best Director, Best Film.
Yeah. So World War II has won Oscars for Mrs. Miniver. Never heard of that one. You heard of that one? That was actually made
Mrs. Miniver, I think. Yeah, no.
That was made during World War II. Casablanca.
That's cheating.
From Here to Eternity, Bridge on the River Kwai, Sound of Music, Patton, Schindler's List, English Patient, The King's Speech, Saving Private Ryan, and The Pianist all won Oscars. Vietnam, only The Deer Hunter, Platoon, Forrest Gump, and Born on the 4th of July are the only ones that won Oscars. Apocalypse Now didn't win the Oscars. Surprised by that?
Yeah, I am too, actually, yeah.
So I'm afraid, Mark, I have to declare it's 2-1. World War II has it in the bag.
They truly are the greatest generation.
Yeah, they really are. Yeah. No wonder no one talks about Vietnam anymore.
I feel like we settled this. Yeah, I mean, how many pub conversations do we have about like which is the better war? And now I feel like it's all settled.
But the other noticeable thing I noticed about that is that they are still making films about World War II. And actually, I would say some of the better films about World War II have been...
more recently. More recently made, yeah.
They just don't make films about Vietnam anymore. I mean, I think Kong Skull Island is the closest thing to a Vietnam War film I saw in the past, 15 years.
That was pretty good.
Yeah, so interesting. Maybe America's trying to, just sweep it under the carpet. I don't know.
Quietly put it to one side.
Yeah. So anyway, this episode of Tomorrow's World comes from the 31st of January 1973. Obviously the closest episode I could find to this momentous occasion. And I would say that it's a fairly workmanlike episode, isn't it, Mark? After all the excitement of Hale and Pace in the last episode, this is very much a return to, real sort of meat and potatoes Tomorrow's World, isn't it? There's no real sort of huge exciting things in it.
No. Well, I loved learning. So for the listener, the eager-eared listener at home, it was really exciting right at the end of this episode to learn that next week's episode is the Holland special that you and I have already discussed and audited. So in a sense, it's like it made this episode it made sense of this episode in a more fulfilling way for me, because it is meat and potatoes, it is standard, good quality, decent, not knock it out of the park, like just do a good week's worth Tomorrow's World, because all the exciting stuff is next.
Yeah.
The powder's been kept dry for next week's fantastic Sense Store special.
And the other thing to note is that although this would have been broadcast in colour, if you had a colour TV at the time, the copy that we found was recorded in black and white. So I think perhaps there's a sense that it's seems more old-fashioned to our eyes than perhaps it would have done if we were seeing the colour version.
And actually, there's a couple of bits, because luckily I think you've also managed to track down a couple of the VTs hidden away in the dark web or whatever, so you can actually see a little bit of the colour of how it looked. And obviously we've seen episodes in and around this time, but the weird thing is, because it's in black and white, it feels so much closer to the 60s episodes, even though we have seen episodes before and after this that feel more futuristic. It's really, it does a number on you, the way it's been recorded.
Definitely.
From broadcast. Yeah, because it's even like the sound quality is worse on this version than some of the film clips we found, which are, I don't know, okay, it's not 4K, but like it's definitely high quality.
Presumably the sound quality will match the sound quality of that opening segment, which you accidentally recorded on your laptop rather than the microphone, Mark.
I did, Russ. Yeah, absolutely.
Just in case anyone's wondering why that opening segment sounds a bit funny.
There's a bit of, I was going to make it an Easter egg for. There you go.
Anyway, right, shall we get stuck in?
Let's do it.
In this edition, tin cans will be transformed before your very eyes. We'll be introducing a breakthrough development for your car and showing you a new British camera.
Now, these early episodes, Mark, are an absolute embarrassment of riches, aren't they, for you? Because seemingly every time we watch one, it has a different title sequence.
I did a quick analysis just for my own sanity, Russ, because it was one of those things where I felt like every episode we see from this era actually seems to have had its own unique credits. So I checked my spreadsheet because I log all these things. This is the 10th episode we've watched from the 60s and 70s that we've audited, and it's the 9th different opening sequence, which I just find to be actually quite perverse and almost
absolutely
cruel, but nonetheless
burning through the license fee, aren't they? Surely with a largesse like that.
This is one of those things that really feels like they had money, didn't they? They actually had money. The arrogance to decide that every new season of Tomorrow's World would have its own opening credits. So shall I? Let me go through them. Same classic theme tune. Obviously, that goes without saying. So we start off with a wide shot of an explosion in the field, which looks like a missile launch, but there's no actual rocket. I don't think it's anything. I think it's just an explosion in the field. But there's a lovely crash zoom and then a match cut of a man in a kind of a protective, tinfoil suit walking through a fire, which I thought was a good bit of business. We see a plane crashing in slow motion with a filter to make it look like a film negative. The same filter is used on the footage of a man jumping out of a plane, not the same plane, one hopes, which is reversed. So it looks like he's jumping back into the plane, Mission Impossible Tom Cruise style. What looks like the film of the analysis of the aerodynamics of two different objects. A man in a spacesuit screwing something into something else. A close-up of a pilot ejecting from a plane from one of those shots of between his legs as you see them kind of pull back the thing. I don't know what you call it. Handle. A heated metal rectangle being smashed by an industrial press. Not the last time we'll see kind of an industrial press in this particular episode. A quick reveal of the show's title that seems to be engraved into some material. Some metal, I think. I couldn't quite tell. Maybe wood. An infrared film of who knows what. Fast rotating point of view shot of some surgeons looking over you in an operating theatre. I don't know if you spotted that one. That was weird. Another abstract film of what looks like a tiny explosion taking place in a biological cell. More negative film action, this time the close-up of an eye. We'll get to that in a minute.
Well, I was going to say.
You want to do it now? Yeah.
I need to stop you there, Mark.
Yeah.
In the film 2001 A Space Odyssey, after Dave goes through the Stargates, there's a lot of abstract images. And there's images that are, I don't know what that technique is called, but it's where they're hyper-colorized and like oversaturated. And in the film, there is a distinct close-up of Dave's eyeball, and it looks exactly
It does look exactly like
and I'd love to know. Obviously, we've not got a colour version of this opening sequence. Well, we've not seen one. So I would love to know whether that eyeball in the opening sequence was colorized in the same way that it is in 2001, or whether it is more natural. But it is quite clearly a blatant Stanley Kubrick reference, Mark. Straight off the bat.
It is.
Can't believe we retired that.
I can't believe, that category is up there in the rafters, Russ. Along with Michael Jordan's jersey. It's getting busy up there. I know. We can never talk about it. We shall never mention it, Russ. But you were absolutely spot on. After the eye, we see several angles of the same reversed footage of an exploding car. And I said, which I'm assuming is a Ford. Now, I will be honest with you. I did think I knew what the car was. I did think I recognised
Well, you should do.
I did think it was a...
You've been for a drive in one, Mark, many a time.
Mark III. I know. Go on. Go on, Russ.
Beautiful Mark. It's a beautiful Mark III Ford Cortina, Mark. The fourth car I ever owned was a lovely dark blue Mark III Ford Cortina with a black.
That was a lovely
roof.
car.
Yes,
I enjoyed that. Yep.
Listeners at home who don't know anything about cars would recognise it as the car from Life on Mars. They drive around in a brown one of those, but absolutely lovely car. But this one appears to get blown up.
It does, yeah. We see several shots of it being exploded. We then see the same or a similar car, at least, driving over us at speed. And then the title card, which is white lettering and a black background, that I estimate might be on screen for no more than 10 frames. And then we cut to Baxter, who's looking very elegant and probably slightly overdressed in his suit. In what looks like a very 70s studio, but we can't quite make it out because it's all black and white.
Yeah, there's some interesting stuff going on in the background, like some sort of weird, looks like, I don't know, lumps of old escalator or something, something to fill the space.
I would like to draw attention to, after he does a little introduction, a little tease of introduction, and a little tease of what's coming up, and we there's a dissolve to the first package. He does a kind of a little sinister, little
moistening of the lips.
It almost looks like he's tasting your screen, which I found quite sinister. But other than that, like classic Baxter. But yeah, a brand new opening credits, and I have to say they rattle through it. How long does it last? 10 seconds, and yet there's a rough estimate, nearly 15, 16 different shots.
And each one of those shots cost £100,000, Mark.
£100,000, absolutely. Thanks to the unique way the BBC is funded as well by us.
Maybe Baxter is licking his lips because he knows he's got fish on the menu, and absolutely salivating at the prospect.
Yum.
So we have a look at what he's anticipating.
First, though, the continual harassment of the Cod War. Now, it may be that in the not-too-distant future, that 50-mile limit will be immaterial, because some scientists in Norway believe that the fish may soon be attracted by the fishermen to exactly where they need them.
Norway has some of the finest salmon fishing in Europe. Keen anglers will travel hundreds of miles to fish a stretch of water like this. But the fish could vanish. Increasingly, these mountain rivers are being endangered by heavy industry. The sudden accidental discharge of some toxic industrial material upstream can pollute a river so badly that within a few hours, every living creature in it will die. And the trouble is that even when the source of that pollution is stopped and the river is clear again, salmon like this still won't return to breed unless the river is first restocked with live young fish. For years, scientists have been trying to discover why this is so and what it is that attracts the fish back. Now, two researchers at Oslo University, one a chemist and the other a zoologist, think that they have the answer, and that at some stage in the future they may even be able to control fish migration. They believe that migrating fish are guided back to their own breeding grounds by chemical substances called pheromones that are released by the young fish still in the river from the mucus or slime that naturally coats its body. And that's why it's necessary to restock a river if ever the young fish have been killed off. The bucket contains anesthetic, and this sea char is soon fast asleep. By the time it wakes later, it will have given scientists one more piece of positive information as to how it recognizes its own breeding ground. Water containing pheromones extracted from the mucus of its own young is released onto the fish's snout. A probe capable of picking up minute electrical charges is carefully inserted deep into the fish's brain. Even while it's asleep, this fish identifies the pheromones of its own young, and there's a sharp increase in its brain activity, which is picked up by the probe. The burst of brain activity, as well as being displayed on the oscilloscope, is amplified through an audio speaker, and the signals are also recorded on magnetic tape for further analysis. Later, when the fish has had time to recover from its sleeping draught, the researchers put it through another test. This is a Y maze, a standard piece of scientific test apparatus. Young fish are put in the tank at the end of the right-hand branch of the Y, and, after allowing sufficient time for the pheromones to mix with the stream, adult fish are released. The first isn't interested. They're not its young, and it chooses the left-hand branch. But this is the test fish, and they are its young. And without hesitation, it chooses the right-hand branch, even though initially it's reluctant to swim close to the rather bright lights necessary for filming.
You don't hear a lot about the Cod War these days, do you?
You really don't know. No, you don't, Mark. No. It's one of those things that I knew existed. I'd never really bothered to look into in any way whatsoever. I just knew it was some sort of dispute with Iceland about cod.
Fishing rights.
Yeah.
But it's front and centre of Raymond's mind. This whole segment, which never mentions the Cod War once, he absolutely introduces as this is the new front and this ongoing skirmish with those dastardly Icelandic.
Yeah. Well, I think, as you mentioned, as you quite rightly put in the notes, I think it's very much Britain's Vietnam in terms of it was something that we got involved with, and what people would perceive to be the weaker enemy absolutely did a number on us. And so we just, don't like to talk about it anymore. Apparently there's been 10 cod wars with the Icelandics since it's been going since the 15th century. There was a treaty signed in Utrecht, actually.
God, I thought it was the 50s and 60s.
No, there was a treaty signed in Utrecht back in the 15th century, and sort of ever since then there's been sort of disagreements over it, and so Icelandic historians say there's been 10 of them since the 15th century, but there was 3 modern cod wars, 1958 to 61, 72 to 73, and 75 to 76. But it all started quite innocently, I think, fairly innocently, when in 1952 the Icelandics decided to expand their territorial waters.
Territorial waters, yeah.
From 3 nautical miles to 4 nautical miles from their coast, which isn't just not a huge amount, is it, Mark? It's one extra mile, one measly extra mile.
Yeah, isn't it like 12 now?
Well,
anyway. Oh, yeah. So one extra mile.
With the backing of the International Court of Justice, who said, this is absolutely fine. The British absolutely shit the bed over it. So they started sending in the Royal Navy to harass the Icelandics. The Icelandics didn't have a navy; they just had a coast guard. The coast guard absolutely rang rings around the Royal Navy. So, despite the bullying of the Royal Navy, the Icelandics had a trump card, especially in the 70s, where they said, "Look, if you don't let us get what we want, we will withdraw from NATO." And that particular part of the ocean where they are was absolutely key for strategically important in the Cold War, particularly for protection against submarines, I think it was. So they were able to play that trump card. And because they were basically, the Icelandics don't really care about anything, or certainly didn't at the time, care about anything other than fishing. So they were completely balls to the wall, all in. They were not going to give this up. Whereas obviously, the Britain had slightly less of a stake in the whole thing.
Also, they were the bad guys.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Britain were the bad guys. Yeah.
So by the end of it, not only did the Icelandics win every single one of these skirmishes in terms of getting their way and further expanding their territory, by the end of it, the Icelandic fishing waters expanded to 200 nautical miles from Iceland. Yeah, and completely decimated the British fishing industry. So it was just very much a sort of David and Goliath sort of thing. And I feel like that if the British hadn't have been so belligerent at the beginning, the Icelandics probably wouldn't have retaliated so much.
They would have stopped at 4.
Yeah, they could have just come to an agreement, because the whole point of the treaty in the 15th century was the waters were sort of meant to be kept free so that both sides could fish in them equally. Yeah. And all of this belligerence just meant that it turns out that the Icelandics just claimed it all for themselves, and the British could no longer fish in them. So I thought it was quite interesting.
Jesus Christ. Some things never change, do they?
The other thing I was thinking about when I was watching that, pheromones, Mark. Do you remember back in the golden age of lads mags when we were teenagers?
Yep.
In the back, in the adverts in the back, there would always be adverts for fake IDs. And the other thing there'd all be adverts for was pheromone sprays. That they spray yourself with pheromones to make girls fancy you. I always wondered, do they still sell those? Do they still exist?
I don't think so, do you?
Do you think anybody ever, had any success with those? Do you think they even contained pheromones? How do they make them? Do you think they just extracted sweat from...
Well, I wonder if they manhandle fish like Slugworth does in this one. Just gloopy glutinous, disgusting. No, I hadn't thought about that in years. No. Do you know anyone who bought one? I don't think I did.
I mean, I can think of somebody who I can guess might have bought one, but I'll have to text him. I'll text him and ask him.
Do it at the half-time break before we swap ends.
Yeah. He definitely bought a fake ID. I know that.
The international,
the international...
union of students, whatever. Yeah. God, they were simpler.
It does seem like pheromones. The way that Raymondo talks about them, it does seem like the pheromones are very much a sort of a fairly new discovery.
Well, that's what he says. He says he implies it's a relatively. I didn't write what he said, but he basically said like it's a wonderful new discovery that we just come across, which I suppose surprised me because I would have thought that the idea of I don't know. I suppose it's one of those things you don't know it's there until you discover it. At which point you've now know it's there. I don't know. I was surprised.
Although knowing Raymondo's way with the ladies, I imagine he's absolutely reeking of. I'm surprised we can see him through the rich fog of pheromones. That must be.
I think we now know why this was broadcast in colour, but the sheer pheromone cloud in front of him is making it black and white.
Does seem to. I don't know whether you've noticed. There does seem to be a very slight trend we've noticed of man trying to tame the wild beasts of the ocean that are fish. There's been a few segments over the episodes. I think the last time we saw it was the Japanese trying to use some sort of sounds to
sound shepherding or sonar shepherding. Yeah,
and they all sound like they don't work, do they? They all sound like coppers.
Well, you know they don't work. Russ.
Because otherwise, there'd be like sea shepherds, like sort of go, come by.
I mean, yeah, absolutely, yeah. That's why they still use nets.
But I think they do a fairly good job in this segment of making it, reasonably interesting. It's just some blokes mucking about with fish in a lab, but it's quite nicely filmed. All of the equipment's nicely framed, and we've got a nice bit of narration from Derek Cooper. I haven't heard of him for a while, and we get to see these Norwegian scientists at work. One of whom, as you pointed out, looks exactly like Slugworth from Willy Wonka.
He appears for the first time. We cut to like a very clean empty fish tank bar, two fish swimming around, and Professor Slugworth just slowly kind of rolls in horizontally, leering at the fish. But the weird thing about it is like he's not threatening, like like he's completely unemotional throughout this whole piece. This segment is a explosion of incredible visuals that I'm sure were not as fascinating when this was broadcast, and obviously it doesn't come across on the audio. But not only do we see Slugworth kind of leering at the fish, he picks one out, and then you see him for a very prolonged time wrestling.
It looks like he's trying to give it a Chinese burn or something. Like
it does, yeah. And it's one of those things where, like, obviously they're trying to show that this fish has this kind of, gelatinous kind of film over them. It's like, well, bloody hell, of course there is, because people keep trying to give him Chinese burns. And then he just basically dumps it into a bucket.
It doesn't look happy, does it?
Full of... It does not look happy, but dumps it into a... No, it looks really unhappy. Dumps it into a bucket of... and to anesthetize it. No explanation of whether... I'm hoping the bucket is mostly water, but for all I know, it's entirely ammonia or something like that, or whatever. And then we cut to this close-up of this fish's head. It's lidless eyes staring out with this tube blasting water down its throat, and it is one of the most astonishing things I've ever seen in my adult life.
This immediately reminded me of the scene in A Clockwork Orange, where
absolutely correct. I didn't want to mention Kubrick, but that is exactly what I thought of.
Yeah. This poor fish just absolutely frozen in terror with that pipe. Does that pipe need to be that big?
Does any of this need to happen? Like, the fish isn't awake in theory. The fish is supposed to be asleep, but like, there's no evidence because they have no eyelids. So they're not supposed to see the outside world. They're supposed to see underwaters. Like, all this is information they should not be processing. Russ. No, it's just blasting water into them. And of course, like, there's so much. It's kind of dribbling out their mouths. It's sick. and then this little kind of horrible little tube just starts dropping stuff into its, I don't know, I know fish don't have noses, but in their face. And then later on we cut back and they've just stuck something straight into the head. I have a sneaky suspicion, Russ. I'm not sure they're concerned about the welfare of this fish whatsoever.
It did make me think that...
Can I just say, by the way, if Charlie Bucket was asked to steal this fish, he absolutely would have given it back to you. He's not going to carry this around.
No. But it did make me think that a lot of these old episodes, we've noticed that it tends to have test subjects
Yes.
being clamped into
Yes.
some sort of equipment.
Absolutely
Usually their
right.
head.
Yeah.
That seemed to be all the rage back then. It's just clamping people or animals into things and doing tests on
Well,
them.
I mean, in the next episode, obviously you have that
Yeah.
device where, like, with the spinal tap that rotates people around.
Yeah.
It's like that was, which we didn't realize was torture until you did the research on it. Yeah, no, God, they just can't stop it.
But and the other thing, I mean, the other weird thing I think in this segment is that they then claim that they've got a machine that is listening to the brain activity
Yeah, they do.
Of-
Yeah.
of the fish. And I mean, what's going on there? Because it's not, to my ears, it sounds like indistinct people talking while playing a
does.
very rapid game of table tennis. It does not sound like just the random beeping or random sort of white noise of a device. It genuinely sounds like voices. Are they suggesting that that salmon has voices in its head? That's what they like.
You know what it reminded me of? Do you remember, like, when we were growing up and it wasn't DAB, it was FM and AM and, LW and stuff like that, where you could tune into the number channels, which were those stations that repeated numbers over and over again that apparently were something to do with the Cold War. And the other thing where people had convinced themselves that you could tune in to the right frequency and you'd hear, like, the spirit
Voices
realm.
of the dead. Yeah.
And that's what that sounds like. It's like that fish is channeling the dead, which would explain its shocked look.
I mean, maybe that's what they did. The whole pheromone thing's an absolute cover for their paranormal experiments.
Yeah.
And then it finishes off with a very unconvincing bit of. I mean, we're not scientists, Mark, but I like to think that we can spot whether an experiment is worthwhile or not.
Yeah, I think we can, Russ.
And this
I think we
so-called
can.
maze that they're putting these
yeah.
fish through to see whether the pheromone thing is working. It is literally a coin flip because it's called a Y maze. It's just two options.
2 channels.
I
yeah.
just don't think that is thorough enough. A test. If it can only go down 2 channels, it's gonna. If it just goes down 1 channel slightly more, which is perfectly possible, then it looks like the test has worked. Surely.
I don't believe the Y maze brings the kind of scientific rigor that can conclusively confirm the fish's motivation for picking one channel over the other. It's
probably just whichever one it thinks is closest to the exit, so I can get the hell out of that place, that madhouse.
Yeah, the one furthest away from the dead people trying to haunt its mind. And the thing is, like, it wouldn't have been that difficult to kind of like even put a third channel in. Great work, everyone. And at the heart of it is the idea, I think, because this is why, to go back to where I was starting, at no point does this segment ever discuss the Cod War. In fact, these aren't cod.
No, they're salmon.
They're salmon. Yeah, absolutely. But Baxter, the way Baxter kind of introduces it, as I said, it makes it sound like it's opening up in a new front in the Cod War. And the implication from Baxter seems to be, we're going to weaponize these pheromones. We're going to put it in the waters of Orkney, and then we'll see how those fucking Icelandic love it when we flirt their fish over to our shores.
Yeah.
And I'm going to guess, Russ, I've not done any research, I'm going to guess that's exactly what happened. And the only fish left in Iceland are incels.
I mean, we've already established that. Well, we haven't established. We've already assumed that Baxter owns a beautiful boat of some kind.
Beautiful.
So do you think
beautiful? They're only $8,000, so yeah, of course he does.
To punt up there onto the front lines and just start pouring sacks of pheromones into the ocean.
Yeah.
Pronto. You won't be surprised, Mark, but the area of fish pheromone research is not. It isn't exactly, isn't right the bleeding edge of scientific research these days. I think everyone has agreed that yes, fish do indeed have pheromones, and they do use them because obviously they're by and large very social animals. They don't have CB radios, and they can't talk to each other, so they have to communicate with each other in some way. So it is through pheromones that they express. So they have different ones that they use for different purposes. They've got ones that they use to sound the alarm. They've got ones that they use for migration. Ones for sex. And then ones that live in like a hierarchical societies, they have ones to establish social cues. So, one like a big one will turn up with the "I'm the daddy now" pheromone, and all the other ones will cower, sort of thing. But there's not really been any progress on actually using them, humans using them to control fish behaviour really at all. So they've not, none of this stuff that they're talking about has come to fruition. Apart from there's one thing that they really are really keen to use it for, and there's actually been a lot of papers published about it. They still haven't done it yet. But it does seem like if they are going to do it, this will be the thing. And it's, do you know what the lamprey looks like?
Horrible, disgusting
I'll put
thing.
a picture of a couple at the bottom of the thing.
Absolutely
Utterly
disgusting
terrifying
things,
looking, aren't they?
Absolutely
They
horrible.
they predate the dinosaurs. You know, anybody at home, just Google lamprey, Lamprey. And they sort of just have these giant circular mouths full of teeth. And what they do is they look for other fish and they just clamp onto the side of them, like giant sort of leech type thing, and suck the life out of it. They're native to the Atlantic, but they obviously got sort of stuck to the bottom of boats or whatever, and ended up in the Great Lakes where they're not supposed to be. And they're absolutely decimated fish stocks in the Great Lakes. So it was in about 2005 they came up with the idea. They managed to isolate the migratory pheromone of the lamprey. So the big plan, and it still is a plan, they've not done it yet, is to try and get the lampreys to migrate back out of the Great Lakes and back into the Atlantic, because lamprey stocks in the Atlantic are actually very low, because apparently lampreys are absolutely delicious. Yes.
Really?
Yeah. Obviously, famously, and this is quite a famous quote, I'm sure you heard it, Mark, that King Henry I, died from a surfeit of lampreys because he ate so many of them.
That's true.
Because apparently they're very deliciously meaty, so you know, people like to eat them when they weren't allowed to eat meat. But there's lots of different countries that really love lampreys. The Portuguese absolutely go mad for lampreys. And I don't really saw the picture next to the picture of the lampreys. Yeah,
I did, Russ. It's a horrible
That
picture.
is-
It's actually worse than the live
that
lamprey.
is one of Portugal's national dishes. That's lamprey rice. Look at it.
Wow.
Would you eat that?
I mean, if I was on holiday, I'd probably try it, but
Why
I
is
wouldn't
it-
order
why
it.
is it
I mean,
that colour?
I like
Why is it
Portuguese
that
food.
colour?
I don't know. I mean, like, it's really... Because the thing is, like, it's just unpleasant, isn't it? Well, I mean, what colour would you call that?
It's not quite brown, but not quite grey. It's like a...
No.
It's the worst parts of brown and the worst parts of grey really combined there.
It looks like waste.
Yeah,
water.
it really does,
Like,
doesn't it?
yeah.
I'm sure it's delicious. though.
Yeah, I'm sure. The thing is, like, I really enjoy Portuguese food, so my gut instinct tells me it's probably really tasty.
Yeah.
But it is horrendously unappetizing to look at and to consider and to. I suppose it's one of those things maybe you'd order because you wouldn't know what the Portuguese for lamprey is.
Yes, yeah, that's a good point. And it turns out as I said, the Henry I died of a surfeit of lampreys. Turns out the royal family still absolutely love lampreys. The Queen had lamprey pie for her coronation, and also on her Diamond Jubilee, they baked her one as well. So she's still, well, she's not anymore, she's dead now, isn't she? But right up until the end, basically, still absolutely scoffing lampreys.
Lampreys.
Yeah.
I don't remember reading that on her death certificate. Surfeit lampreys. Yeah, there you go. That makes sense though.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, so overall, in conclusion, it's not happened. Might happen. No guarantee, though, Mark. You know, they very much like nuclear fusion. Fish mind control is still a dream. Just beyond the horizon.
Just that little bit, just out of reach.
out of
still
reach, yeah,
further.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, Mark, we've had the fishing. So why don't we get onto the rod?
Oh, that was worth it.
Pheromones, a comparatively recent discovery and amongst the most remarkable materials in nature. Now, a motor car and Michael Rod.
A modern car has exceedingly complex electrical systems, and with each model, demands for additional electrical gadgetry seem to increase. Apart from basic requirements, lighting and ignition, we now have radios, some cars have stereo, power-operated windows, bird scarers. I hope this isn't one with a burglar alarm. If I never get into here, we can see how, conventionally, a car gets its electricity. It's carried in PVC-insulated cables that are tied together in bunches called harnesses or looms. And this is a perfectly satisfactory way of distributing electricity along the car. But it is bulky, and it tends to get dirty. And this is an important point because the cables are color-coded for identification. But after a few years of oil and dirt, it becomes difficult to tell one cable from t'other. Another thing, the inner cables are completely out of sight, so should a short circuit occur, it's difficult to locate. Now, there's a completely new concept in multiple wiring, and it's being tested out in this vehicle. These are the same PVC-insulated cables which are now welded to a flat PVC backing strip which can be stuck to the metal contours of the car, and they take up far less room, passing easily through body panels and underneath the carpets. Now, if they get covered with oil, a wipe will restore the colour and identification. Heat dissipation from a cable carrying a heavy current to a headlamp, say, is better, and they can be easily serviced. Now, any local damage to a cable here can be spotted easily. Now, this is the conventional. wiring harness. A lot of hand work has gone into producing this, and imagine having to sort out a problem inside there. Here's the same thing using the new format. There's a junction, there's a fuse box. Shortly, a major British car manufacturer will announce a new line wired up using this new system.
A major British car manufacturer, Mark. He's standing in front of a
Russell.
Morris Marina there. Do we think that Michael Rodd is taking backhanders from British Leylands?
God, I don't like libeling people, Russ, but it's not libel if it's true.
It seems like barely a week goes by without him bigging up one of their motor cars.
They're famously brilliant cars.
Yeah. I mean, it is a boring set. I imagine this is what people who don't like cars think all things about cars are like in their minds.
Yeah,
Because this is a rubbish segment, and it's a load of old cobblers, isn't it? Because I mean, there's a clear reason you can see why those wires are bundled up in those. It's because he holds up the original loom, which this is meant to be replacing, and it looks really sturdy. It looks really immune to dust and grime and heat and water and everything. And he's claiming that it's going to be better to replace that with what basically looks like a really flimsy sort of like the cable you stick in the back of an old printer.
Yeah.
And I mean, surely they're just going to get battered,
bashed, cut, shredded. I don't know, whatever. Yeah.
So is this just a case of British Leyland cutting costs and then trying to claim that it's actually a new innovation, when instead actually all they're doing is just saving money on making those expensive handmade wiring harnesses that's my wonder.
I mean, who cares, actually, to be honest with us, because this whole segment is nonsense. But how did this end up in the show?
Because Rod's being paid by British Leyland.
That's the thing. It's like, maybe you're not wrong. I mean, he's still alive. He can still sue us.
That's a good point.
We can't prove it, Russ, except the sheer weight of evidence in the segment. It makes no sense that this is broadcast in television. At least he doesn't mention the brand. God, it's just like I remember watching it. I suppose, like, obviously, whenever I watch this the first time, I try and watch it all the way through, and I don't take notes. I let the whole episode wash over me, and I suppose every segment starts. I'm the first half a second, I'm always like, oh, this could be good, and then sometimes within just over half a second, you're like, nope. And with this one, I kept him kind of sitting there, like, leaning forward, thinking, like, any second now, I'm going to understand why this is on television and why this is on Tomorrow's World, especially, because it's interesting because I think this is the second audit not in a row for us, but like the last time we discussed cars on Tomorrow's World all the time, it was the Easter special episode where Kieran Prendeville was talking about the tragedy of cars being stored in boggy fields. And again, it's like that was a That's Life piece on a program. I suppose there's a part of me that we think that this program should always have with it some kind of, not just an optimistic bent, but like a kind of a sense of not just what the thing is that we're seeing, but like how you can kind of in your head project forward and imagine how much better life will be because of this thing. So there is a lot of pressure, I think, on this thing being something that is worthy of that kind of effort on the part of the audience. And I don't want to meet the people who saw this segment and are able to project forward and imagine how much better life would be with this new wiring approach that Leyland were bringing to their Morris. Oh, Jesus, Russ.
The only people who are excited about this would be wire salesmen, because they'll have loads more wires to sell after all those complete failure of this new approach.
But what about the noble junction man who doesn't have a job anymore because of this new? And actually, one of the selling things was like, oh, you can wipe them. This new wiring system, you can wipe them. It's like, you could wipe the old wires. Yeah. The issue wasn't that they were getting dirty. And
also,
you
don't need to wipe them because they're in a protective wrapper.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think the absolute number one thing that kept going off in my head as I was watching this time after time is that Rod's talking about all the different things that are now powered in cars. Some cars have stereo, power-operated windows. There's a short pause. And then he says bird scarers. I have never heard of a car that came fitted with a bird scarer, Mark. How would that even manifest itself? What would it be?
I don't know, is he talking about the horn?
Does he think a car holds a scary birds? Is that what he thinks it is?
Or is this some kind of self-deprecating joke and he's talking about like the mirror in his car and his reflection? I don't know. Like it just, because the weird thing is this is one of the least assured Rod presentations
fluffs
that we've
many
seen.
a line there, doesn't he?
He fluffs a couple of lines in this. I've written them down. We don't need to go through them. You'll have heard them on your, because Rod is normally relatively professional, and obviously he's a professional at this, but like he's strangely unconfident. The bird scarers thing, I actually couldn't tell whether it was entirely legitimate and we've just never heard of this. You, especially, if you've never heard of this, and it exists, that's astonishing. Or whether it was some kind of joke that was so badly delivered that people 60 years in the future are confused. 50 years, I should say. But yeah, it's like, I don't know. It's one of those two things, Russ, and I'm not sure which.
My other enjoyable thing was the way he said t'other, which is a nice little...
very Partridgian
moment. Yeah. But obviously, Mark, I looked into this, and I'm sure you'll be shocked, nay, surprised to discover that this new innovation was not used. And in fact, even 50 years later, they still use exactly the same sort of wiring loom, wiring harness, whatever you want to call it, that he holds up as being this sort of terrible invention. And they are still made by hand, even now, because there's no way of automating it because it's such a complicated procedure. They have such a huge advantage over loose wiring that it's still worth their while getting these things made by hand and put in cars, even now.
Rolled in the thighs of virgins, no doubt.
Yes, yeah. Cable harnesses provide several advantages over loose wires and cables. By binding the many wires and cables into a cable harness, the wires and cables can be better secured against the adverse effects of vibrations, abrasions, and moisture. By constricting the wires into a non-flexible bundle, usage of space is optimized and the risk of a short is decreased. Since the installer only has one harness to install, as opposed to multiple wires, installation time is decreased and the process can be easily standardized. Binding the wires into a flame retardant sleeve also lowers the risk of electrical fires. Makes perfect sense. They are absolutely suited for the job. They do not need replacing, and they weren't replaced. This segment is the worst of the programme, I'm going to predict.
Well, you have seen it already, Russ, so if you're voting at home, you should put a lot of stock in that one. Great. Then should we move on?
From the worst segment to what I think is probably the best segment of the programme, in my opinion.
Thank you, Michael. We're all sometimes alarmed by things that go bump, not to say bang, in the night. William Woollard has been investigating a device that may reduce those odd domestic emergencies.
That explosion was caused by a gas leak. On this occasion it was quite safe because it was set off for us inside a steel tank by people from the fire research station. But it was explosions not too dissimilar from that one which caused the disaster at the Ronan Point block of flats in 1968, in which 3 people were killed, and again in 1971 in the centre of Glasgow, when 22 people lost their lives. And every year in this country there are some 15,000 gas fires and explosions. A small number of people lose their lives and many thousands of pounds worth of property is destroyed. In fact, those figures put gas quite low on the causes of domestic accidents. But even so, they're clearly something we could well do without. Now, for factories and offices, there have for many years been expensive and sophisticated gas detector systems. But in the house, we've had to rely upon this, our sense of smell, and, dare I say it, the lighted match. But not perhaps for very much longer. Let's go into the kitchen. It's a small domestic gas detector. Okay, let's create a gas leak. Gas on. Now, in a few seconds, this should sniff out that there's more gas around here than usual and sound an alarm. There it goes now. Okay, let's turn the gas off. And how does it work? Well, it really all happens inside here, inside this tiny Japanese sensor. We've opened one up so you can see what it contains. The most important thing is this tiny blob. It's made of semiconductor material, which means it doesn't allow current to pass very easily. And it's supported on 2 tiny filaments. You can just see them running between these supports. Now, when a current's passed through one of those filaments there, it heats up the blob to 150 degrees centigrade. And it remains like that as long as there's no gas around. But as soon as gas comes through that gauze, it burns on the surface of the blob, heats it up, lowers its resistance, and allows a current to flow through into the second filament. And it's that current that the electronics pick up and convert into an alarm. Now, it works with any combustible gas, not just domestic gas, but the stuff that comes out of your exhaust, or, say, petrol fumes. So this same device could be used just as well for an exhaust pollution monitor, or to pick up dangerous concentrations of petrol fumes inside the cabin of a boat. But let's stay with the domestic gas for the while. Now, understandably, the woman who slaves over this particular hot stove won't trust us to test the device in her kitchen. So, back to the tank. Now, you have to imagine that this black and empty tank is in fact your shining kitchen at home. The gas stove, you can see that it works, and there on the wall is the detector. The device is very new, so they're still working out the best location for it in relation to the gas source. But as you can see, we've put it quite close. Right, turn the gas off, and on again. Now, I can already smell it. If I were at home during the day and I smelt that, I'd very quickly be looking around for a leak or a gas tap inadvertently left on. But say it was the evening and I was in another room watching television, or even in bed. We're going to add a fourth wall to the kitchen to make it more realistic. So now the gas is slowly filling up your kitchen. Now the detector is set so that it won't go off for minute amounts of gas, the amount that might escape, for example, between your turning it on and getting the match to it. But it will go off long before there's a chance of an explosion. So when you hear the alarm, there's still plenty of time to get in there, turn the gas off, open the window, and call, there it is now, and call the fire brigade. So we know there's a lot of gas in there, but it's not explosive. And we're going to do the unmentionable thing. We're going to show that it's not yet explosive by testing it with this flame. But we repeat, you should never, but never, go searching for a suspected gas leak with a naked light. Right, here goes.
You ever experienced any near misses with gas leaks or sort of gas-related danger?
I don't think so. No, thankfully. Mostly because you can smell it. And normally you just need to turn off the gas oven and then open a window. No, I don't. Have you?
There was one memorable occasion back when I was living in London, Mark, with Mr. James Flood and Mad Dog. And I used to work nights back then, and I remember obviously sleep during the day, and while they both went out to work, and I remember waking up suddenly in the middle of the day and feeling incredibly ill and just immediately throwing up, like just as soon as I woke up. And I went, whoa, what the hell's that? And I went, oh my God, this whole flat reeks of gas. And I went out in the kitchen, and sure enough, the hob had been knocked on but not lit. So while I was obviously somebody had knocked the gas on but not lit it, and then
Russ, who was that person?
I have my suspicions. It was one of either two people, probably more likely one than the other. And
yeah, I think so.
And I just thought, wow, I mean, it's a good job, everyone's out at work and I was just asleep and things like that, because it really did smell like that flat probably would have gone boom if there'd been anybody lit a cigarette or such like. But yeah, I mean, I wish I had one of these. If I'd had one of these alarms fitted, maybe it would have woken me up. Although I don't think this one would have woken me up, because it is remarkably quiet for an alarm that's meant to be alerting you to a hazard, isn't it?
It's a very respectful alarm. Yeah, absolutely. It barely wants to intrude in your otherwise normal day.
Yeah. Unlike that beautiful explosion at the beginning, Mark, which we opens the segments, which is
and closes, and it is absolutely, it's an incredibly good noise. I was thinking like one of the Star Wars prequels is a moment where Obi-Wan's in a spaceship and he drops some kind of bomb. And it's one of those moments where, like, you know, it explodes and makes this incredibly brilliant, well-designed noise that gets people very excited. And I was thinking it's also like people who drive, you know, really expensive fast cars love to go through a tunnel and wind their window down and listen to it. And you totally get it. And that's what this explosion sounds like, especially the kind of the way that it's so sonorous, and the way they actually let the sound breathe. So you hear the echo kind of working its way around this huge kind of warehouse that they're in. Oh, I'd recommend it. It's a great noise. I wouldn't manufacture it in my own home, but it's very, mostly because we don't have gas. But yeah, it's really good. And so as a result, the alarm it does not live up to the headline acts.
No, not at all. I mean, he mentions about it sort of being able to hear it from when you've got the TV on in the other room. I don't think I would.
No, only if it's next to the television. But by that point, you would have smelled the gas.
Yeah, but as you say, they're in this sort of this large warehouse. He says it's a fire research institute. He doesn't say which one, so I was unable to find out which one it was. But there was something.
Shepherd's Bush.
Probably, yeah. But there was something about the very sort of industrial design of the place, and there's a certain amount of gantry work in the background. Unfortunately, nothing presented from it, but you can see it in the background.
No.
And there's a yellow, one of those yellow rotating lights there.
Yep.
Then that alarm goes off, that sort of industrial alarm goes off. And it was very reminiscent to me of the last sort of 15, 20 minutes of the film Aliens.
Oh,
when the facility's about to explode and the alarm's going off and she was trying to escape. And I was just wondering, because obviously Aliens was made in Britain. I'm not suggesting James Cameron himself watched this episode of Tomorrow's World, but I think mostly the crew on Aliens were British. I wonder whether, you know, one of them had either watched this episode or had been to the Fire Research Institute and seen this sort of thing.
The setup. Yeah. It definitely feels like the building's been repurposed from something else, doesn't it? Yeah. Oh, I hadn't put that together. I suppose I wasn't thinking of Aliens, but yeah. Go on, Russ. Why not? Yeah, that's exactly what happens.
Yeah. It's just a shame that Stanley Kubrick didn't direct Aliens, really, isn't it?
I know.
Might be a bit less action packed, though, I guess. But yeah, no, I do like this segment. There's plenty to be seen in this. Obviously, it's a triumphant return of Willy Woolley. We've not seen him for a while, have we? Quite a few episodes.
No, not for a while.
He's actually wearing a beautiful white Woolly. Beautiful Woolly, a beautiful white woolly jumper,
beautiful
roll neck.
Woolly. Yeah, beautiful.
It sort of makes him look very Scandinavian. He's obviously got that blonde haircut and the blue eyes already, and he's got that sort of.
He looks like he's fresh off the front line of the Cod War.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we know what side his cod's battered.
Actually, I was going through the film footage you were good enough to track down, and I was looking for images, and I got one of Willy Woolley. His eyes are so green, it's unreal. I was gobsmacked how green his eyes were. Well, you know, you'll see at some point probably. He looks fabulous.
Yeah. I think it's probably the thinnest we've seen him as well. I mean, this is, you know,
he's never fat, but he's definitely.
But I think that sort of. Although roll necks really are sort of like. They split people, don't they? They make thin people look thinner and fat people look fatter, don't they? It's sort of very much what's going on there. But he obviously, to show us this alarm obviously needs to show it to us in a domestic setting. He can't just show it to us in this research institute. So he pops into some lady's kitchen, by all accounts, to try it out on her stove. Are you dubious about that, Mark? Do you think that's not what happens?
I have my doubts, Russ. Let me put it that way. And by the way, I don't want to preempt the tropes, but the line, understandably, the woman who slaves over this particular hot stove won't trust us to test the device in her kitchen, is a wonderful bit of casual sexism. There is no doubt in my mind whatsoever that is not a domestic kitchen. What that is the kitchen for the fire brigade, in whose institution they are clearly filming. That no one has on the back of their kitchen door what looks like those kind of boring HSE guidance laminated posters that you always get at work. Pure lie. That's what that is.
Do you think you had to pull all of the pull all the page 3s off of the pins all over the walls?
That's not what I thought you were going to say. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the jazz calendars have to come down, guys. Yeah. Do you know what, Russ? He can pull the wool over his own head when he's putting that jumper on, but he can't pull it over my eyes.
It's a nice bit of business. I think it's a very, very clear demonstration of exactly how this device works. I was left in no doubt as to exactly how that thing works. And then slightly patronisingly, And I would have thought this would be a bit too early for the BBC to be giving pointless safety advice. He does decide, while waving a giant flaming torch in the direction of the gas leak, tell us that we should under no circumstances go looking for a gas leak with a naked flame. Has anybody in the history of anything ever gone looking for a gas leak with a naked flame, Mark? How would you look for a gas leak anyway?
Unsuccessfully.
Do you think some people think, I'll just wave it around until something catches fire, and then I'll be able to see where it's coming out of the pipe?
Yeah. I think maybe in people's head, like if you hold up a match, like maybe they'll see like the flame just slightly lean towards, like a compass. That's an incredible bit of advice. The weird thing is, like, there's a lot I really like about this, because you're absolutely right. He really goes in. He really explains how the sensor work, or should I say sensor works?
Yes, Japanese sensor.
That's how Japanese sensor, which is really brilliant. And even when they're doing the experiment and they're kind of back in the warehouse, and the cooker is in this kind of metal container, like half a ship's container, they're not faking it. Like the camera is where it looks like it's set up. There are portholes to look into it. He puts a stick in with a flame on it and stuff like that. Oh, really? They're very careful to kind of explain how they're doing it. And then he just throws out this, please don't go looking for it. Such an odd thing to say. I can only assume that's what people do, or did Russ? Because obviously at some point, I suppose. Like gas didn't smell.
Yes, of course. Yeah,
they had to add that. Yeah.
Macaptan. That's what that's called. This thing that they add to gas. Yeah, it's artificially added. It is a natural substance which is also found in animal feces, bad breath, farts, and asparagus wee. So it's obviously deliberately chosen as something that humans find unpleasant and distinctive. Yeah. So that's why it's chosen. And also it mixes well. It mixes well with natural gas. So that's why they use it.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Gotcha. Yeah. It also goes quite quickly though. When you do open a window, it does disappear effectively. I think so. It doesn't linger. It's not like you go into a house and a few days later you can go like, oh, had a gas leak, did you? Oh,
well,
shame.
Obviously, when people talk about gas leaks and things like that, the first thing that pops into my head is, I would say, my favourite ever episode of Bottom, which is Bottom Gas.
Oh, yeah.
Which I actually rewatched recently. And
did you?
Watched it with Matt Birch, actually, when he came to visit.
Oh.
And it's not lost any of its charm. It's still absolutely brilliant. There's a bit where there's a huge explosion from downstairs, and then Rick goes downstairs and Eddie's stand there, and he set fire to the gas main, and he just goes, he goes, what are you doing? He said, I thought I'd burn it off. He goes, what? But the entire North Sea gas field.
North Sea gas, yeah.
Anyway, at the beginning of this segment, Mark, it does that thing that we've noticed a few times in previous episodes, where they mention disasters that I've never heard of. Had you heard of either of these disasters?
I had heard of Ronan Point, and that was because that was the reference point that was used when... Oh, Jesus.
Grenfell?
Grenfell, thank you. God, I completely slipped my mind. Even though I was thinking about it earlier, because obviously that Grenfell was randomly in the last episode. It was the biggest disaster in kind of East... Oh, Grenfell was bigger, but it was the most recent one. And it was seen as a kind of a tipping point for kind of safety in tower blocks. And so I was aware of that, but only post-Grenfell. Nothing else. It didn't mean anything else to me before then. I don't live in Newham. But I assume in Tower Hamlets or Newham you'd know about it, because it was kind of
16th of May 1968, 22-story tower block, killed 4 and injured 17, and it was Ivy Hodge, her name was, and she went to light her gas stove on the 18th floor.
How did they know?
Well, because she survived.
Oh, and then she fessed up.
She went to light her stove. Wow. There was obviously a gas leak. It's caused a gas explosion, which then blew out a load-bearing wall and then caused the corner of the entire building to collapse.
To collapse, yeah.
Because she was right next to the explosion, it blew her clear of the danger area. So she survived it. Not only did she survive it, but her gas stove survived it. And she took the gas stove and continued to use it at her new accommodation that she moved into after she got out of hospital. I bet you couldn't do that with a modern gas stove, Mark. Don't make them like that anymore.
No, but also morally, you shouldn't do that. You'd have thought, like, why would you use a gas stove that you know has killed 4 people?
You think you should get like a little plaque put on it or something like that? But it did make me think, did you ever have at university to have like a really old gas stove? Because I always used to really we had a really old gas stove when I was at University of Nottingham. It had the eye-level grill. I always really liked the eye-level grill because you make really good cheese on toast on that. It's much better than the waist level or knee level grill that you seem to get these days. I don't know why is the eye level grill falling out of fashion, Mark? That's what I want to know.
Well, I mean, I almost took a photo, Russ, but you've been to my house. We do have a grill that's at eye level because we have one of those kind of double oven things, and the top oven is smaller, and that's where the grill is. I don't disagree with you, but it has made it through to the future. The idea of an eye level grill, Russ. Yeah, I do know what you mean. Like that, it's the kind of classic 1960s oven. It's like, I don't think I had one at university. I do think I remember. I think I remember your one not because I remember you cooking bacon on it. I suppose because people wanted the space, didn't they? They wanted the space to have cupboards above it.
Oh yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Oh, actually, also, everyone has one of those extractor jobbies now, don't they? They're like the cooker hood.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
A cooker hood, if that's in the way, I guess. That's probably it, isn't it?
No, that's true. That's probably more likely. Yeah.
But anyway, they eventually demolished that building in 1986.
Ronan Point.
Yeah.
So it stood around for 20 years after. Yeah. Did they repair it, or was it just there like a carcass?
I think it's a phrase.
Like a.
Really. I think everyone just really went off high-rise buildings when that happens. It's sort of like caused a general distrust of high-rise buildings amongst everyone. But they didn't. You didn't blow it up. They actually demolished it piecemeal. Just took it apart. Basically, took it apart. And when they did take it apart, they discovered it was unbelievably badly built. Underneath, there was really, really bad structural weaknesses in it, which were unrelated to the explosion. And they reckon that if they'd left it standing when the Great Storm of '87 came through, those winds would have blown it over. It was that badly put together.
Wow.
So,
do you know what? That was something I was thinking about recently. Actually, it's like we've not had an episode for a very long time where wind was the enemy, like it used to be. Gosh. Yeah. So I mean, if it wasn't one thing, it would have been the other.
Yeah.
Or as Rod would say,
t'other. Yes. Yeah. And then the second disaster they mention, the Clarkston explosion, which is on the outskirts of Glasgow. 21st October 1971. There was a gas main underneath the row of shops and it was leaking, but the engineers couldn't find the leak and they were still on the site. Everyone could smell it. Everyone was going, we can smell gas. This is bad. The engineers could not track it down. And then just the next day, in the middle of the afternoon, the whole thing went up. It killed 22 people, injured 100 people, destroyed 10 shops, a car park, and blew a bus full of people to pieces.
Jeez.
Yeah. And that's a much worse disaster.
Yeah,
Never heard of it. And it has a
no.
much smaller Wikipedia article. It's shocking.
God, I mean that's London vibes.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Happened in Glasgow. It may as well happen abroad. And because actually the film footage that is spliced in is like clearly. I mean, without knowing the facts, and I don't look these things up. Without knowing the facts, the Glasgow one looks catastrophic. Yeah. As opposed to, not that, obviously people died in Rowan Point, but it's like the Glasgow one looks to be leagues more dangerous. And I'd never heard of it in my life. No.
So, I mean, at that rate, so four killed in the London one and 22 killed in the Glasgow one. So that means, hang on a minute. So one Londoner is worth 5.5 Glaswegians, I think
that's about right. Yeah.
Anyway.
Unless they're famous.
Yes, yeah.
So one Londoner is worth 2 Limmys or 6 normal Glaswegians. And maybe one Londoner is worth, I don't know, who's another famous Glaswegian?
Rabsy Nesbitt?
Yeah, one Londoner is worth 2.5 Gregor Fishers or whatever.
The other thing I noticed in that was that Willy Woolley says that there's 15,000 gas fires and explosions per year.
That sounds like a lot. When I heard that, I remember thinking, like, that sounds like a lot to just casually say.
That sounds like there's going to be one going off every,
one in every city in Britain every 4.5 hours or something like that. That sounds like an awful lot, doesn't it?
Do you know, have a guess? So I've got the figure for 2021. How many gas-related fire and explosion incidents there were in the whole of Britain in 2021?
So 15,000 in, let's say, 1972. Yeah. How many in 2021? Things are safer. There's less gas, but there's less gas, but there's only in new homes. There aren't as many new homes as there should be. So I'm thinking this through. But things are safer. We've had a lot of time. 15,000. So that's 3,000.
25.
Hey, there we go. I knew 3,000 was way too big, but I didn't. Just in case it was like suspiciously low. 25 in the whole of 2021.
You see something like that, and you think, how can people complain about health and safety? And red tape and all of that.
Mad, isn't it? Yeah,
they've managed to reduce something from 15,000 to just 25, even though there's more people. Listen to the safety experts. I know what they're talking about.
Yeah. 25. Gosh, and you wonder what went wrong for those 25. But you know what? It was that woman with her oven that was like Christine the car that was just hell bent on, you know.
I imagine it being like, you know, in Lethal Weapon 2 when he's on the toilet with the bomb on it and they jump off of it and the bomb goes off and then the toilet comes flying out of the house and it lands on the car and it's completely intact. I imagine her oven is like exactly the same sort of situation.
Yeah, like the little hobo traveling from tower block to tower block. Yeah, there was one thing I was going to say. It was just an observation, which is that Willy Woolley, when he's demonstrating this device and he's talking about this device, he talks about a device that basically seems to be implying that it's brand new, it's experimental. I'm showing you this, blah blah blah, and yet he goes on to say that it's already on sale in the United States and Japan, and it can't be both. It can't be some experimental thing that needs improving and also be a retail thing that
foreign
you can
countries are theoretical though, Mark. That's if you've learned anything.
And that's true. Yeah, that's true. So is Glasgow. So yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it was just one of those things where like I couldn't quite in my head. I couldn't quite pass how he could say the same thing in the same segment and nobody would have noticed that they disagree with each other. But nonetheless, no, that was it. That was the only other thing. Lovely bit of sexism, lots of lying, but mostly a really good segment with fantastic Foley work.
And of course, Mark, you can indeed buy a gas detector. I mean,
you can.
It's obvious, isn't it? You could buy one. I mean, it's clearly a decent bit of kit. Get yourself on Amazon. Currently, you can get the My Dome Gas Leak Detector version 2. Recommended retail price $25.99. Currently on Amazon, you can buy one for £16.16. And it detects all domestic flammable gases, not just natural gas. It detects, your LPGs, I don't know what else they use, propane, things like that. But it still plugs into the wall, Mark. It is not battery powered. It is still plugged into the wall, much like this one.
Well, I suppose that which actually that was something that surprised me. It was like, do you know what it reminded me of? I didn't have a model railway in the 80s, but like one of my uncles did, and the unit to kind of turn the power on was a box about 20-30 centimeters long and kind of 10 deep, and it'd be this kind of metal box, and there'd be like a dial in the middle, and it looks like that. And the thing is, he had it on the wall, but it plugs in, and I suppose I felt like in the 60s, I don't know how many plug sockets would be in a kitchen, but less than we have now. And I'm thinking like, that's a huge commitment for a family to make, to give up one entire kitchen socket for a gas detector. So it just felt like, ooh, crikey, we're not all socket rich like you, Willy Woolley.
A socket rich environment.
Yeah.
One of the most remarkable things about film is that it can alter the dimensions of time. Slow motion sequences, for example, give us an entirely different view of things with which we may be very familiar. Let's have a look at one or two. Here's an egg struck by a bullet. Not an everyday occurrence in my household, I'll allow, but an extraordinary sequence. Here's something very much more mundane, a droplet of milk falling into a bowl of milk. This is shot at 3,000 pictures per second, and you'll see how long it is before the bounce rises in the center. Here's something we were talking about the other week, the failure of an electronic switch in a circuit in slow motion there. Now, all these slow motion effects are achieved by running the film faster through the camera than the usual television standard of 25 frames or pictures per second. And that is not as simple as it sounds. The camera has to have very special features, and here is a brand new camera due to be announced by its manufacturers tomorrow. It's the first British 16mm camera of its kind, and as you can see, it's about the same size as a professional type conventional equivalent. But this one can run up to 400 times faster than normal, and that means 10,000 pictures a second. Here's the lens, as you can see, but when I turn it round, the first thing you will notice if you are familiar with conventional cameras is that the film here appears to run sideways. The picture is in fact passed from the lens here onto the film through a system of prisms, of which this one is the key. Because the film runs continuously and not in jerks, as in conventional cameras, this is an 8-sided rotating prism, and it spins, incidentally, at 75,000 RPM. At top speed, the film is doing 170 miles an hour, and this means that it runs through the 10 minutes worth of cine film in a second and a half. The camera shutter here rotates so fast that it has to be made of special steel. Ordinary steel would simply fly to pieces. The controls, as you would expect, are fairly complex. At the front here, selectors to control the speed. This one, in fact, is attached to the gearbox to control the drive. And on this panel here, all the normal electric and electronic attachments. Here's the footage counter. These controls virtually give you an infinitely variable speed, because the speed is actually controlled via these knobs and a solid state circuit inside, and the whole thing runs off normal 50-cycle mains current. The lens is a standard camera lens of any required focal length, as you would have seen. Right, I told you it was very fast. Now, let's see just how fast it is. And that was 125 feet of film in about a second and a half, which you may consider somewhat expensive.
I did notice while watching that Raymond does have a very thorough approach to presenting machines, doesn't he? He absolutely gave us a real in-depth tour of exactly every single little part of that camera, didn't he? It's like there was, no stone unturned in terms of, which part did what and how it was working and things like that. I think that's quite unusual. I don't think any of the other presenters are quite so. But I think that demonstrates that he's genuinely interested and keen in these things, sort of regardless of whether we, the viewer, are as much as he is, sort of thing.
Yeah, I get that. I suppose actually when you say it that way, it does seem to. There is kind of an old school quality. It was like, if I'm going to explain this, well, I'm going to learn every single aspect of it, and I'm going to become the world's greatest expert in this particular camera. Because the thing is, like, this is not really about. This is a sales pitch for this specific camera, which we should point out, of course, is a British camera.
Yes.
It's not about slow motion photography and the benefits it could do. That's a throwaway remark at the end as a way to justify the £1,950 sounds like a shit ton of money.
Well, I'm sure you'd like to know exactly how much that is at today's prices.
I would. I really
would.
would.
£20,155 now.
That's a lot of money, Russ. So they have to justify the price.
Obviously, doesn't include the film, which presumably the amount
which would have been a shit ton of money. Yeah. It was 3,000 frames a second. That's a lot of film. Yeah, this is an expensive bit of kit, and it's a sales pitch. It's not a demonstration. And fundamentally, to me, the issue here is that it doesn't. If they were explaining why slow motion photography was really useful and the benefits, like, I want to know about. I want examples. So they give us examples of like slow motion photography, and obviously the milk dropping into the bowl is like an iconic imagery, and it's beautiful. It's poetic, and
what I love about that is that you think it's finished, and then the middle bit comes shooting out upwards.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. It's a wonderful bit, and we've all seen it. We can all picture it. It is really beautiful. It's stunning, actually. But if they'd explained how slow motion photography has been used successfully in safety in industry or whatever it is, or like explain how fast cars can be made faster because I don't care what it is. They don't do that. He spends 80% of the time explaining how literally we use this camera, not in terms of what it can do, but like in how we operate it. And I don't care. Is that mean? I don't care. He does. And I think that's supposed to carry some weight, and maybe it did. Maybe because Raymond thought it was important to point out how to use it. Maybe that's one of those things that's kind of lost. That's been lost to us because again, equally, like I'm sure this would have been more impressive then because people wouldn't necessarily known how. I don't know. They might have guessed, but like it just wouldn't have been as common knowledge like it is now. I don't know. It's just like meh. GB PLC. Well done, everyone. Britain's designed some British company, unnamed British company, designed this new camera that's going to compete with lots of other cameras that are very similar.
He loves a stat, doesn't he? He gives us a stat after stat after stat, doesn't he? It's real sort of like absolute top trumps of. I imagine he's hoping that the German tomorrow's world or the Italian tomorrow's world have got their cameras out. He's got his star trump there. He's got all the higher stats than them. And the other thing is that he claims that the shutter is made of steel. It's made of special steel.
Special steel, Russ. Special steel.
If it wasn't, it would fly to pieces because it's spinning so fast. Does would that happen? Does metal just spontaneously fly to pieces if it spins really fast?
I'm not certain about that at all.
I don't know.
No, I mean, no. I mean, maybe if you like put a bit of blue tack in the end of one, so it was out of balance. Yeah, like it would destroy the camera and kill everyone in the room. No, I that was one of those things that was like that felt like it was thrown in to sound more impressive than it really is. But it was already quite impressive. No, I didn't buy that. I don't buy that there's a special steel that doesn't, that doesn't like. I suppose the implication therefore is like every other bit of steel in Britain that spins is an accident waiting to happen. It's a miracle we survive the working day, Russ.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, well, I'll obviously take his word for it. To be fair, on the British angle, I did discover that the British were very much the pioneers in high-speed photography. We developed it, obviously, World War II, as we developed everything, to examine explosions. And then once we developed atomic weapons, it was seized upon by the Atomic Weapons Research Establishment as a way of studying the very, 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 very beginning of a nuclear blast. So they invented a camera in the 1950s called the C4 rotating mirror high-speed camera. And that was considerably more impressive than this one Raymond's got here, because it could record at up to speeds of 10 million frames per second in the 1950s.
Come off.
Yeah.
You're serious?
So, yeah.
That is
so they would just
incredible.
record the first milliseconds of a nuclear explosion with it. So obviously they wouldn't
What speed is the film traveling at?
They wouldn't record, a whole second's worth of film. They just record a milliseconds worth. But if you scaled that up, it would be 10 million frames per second.
That's still though. That's incredible engineering.
It was a big old boy, weighed about 2 tons. Obviously these days, now we've got digital, you can fill your boots. You don't have to put film in it anymore. You do what you like. The average phone these days can do 1,000 frames per second, which is, good enough for larking about with. I very rarely use the slow motion feature on my phone. It's not something I think about using, even though when I have used it, played with it, it's quite impressive.
And it's fun. Yeah.
Yeah. But obviously now the absolute, Caltech have developed the world's fastest camera. And would you like to have a guess at how many frames per second?
So in the 50s, they were doing 10 million frames per second.
Yeah. So what is the most up-to-date camera able to achieve? And bear in mind, it uses lasers. So it's obviously very high-tech, as we all know.
I mean, honestly, like if you'd asked me to guess without telling me what they were doing in the 50s, I wouldn't have gone as high as 10 million frames a second.
Well,
so it has to be close to 1 billion frames a second or something stupid.
It's not close to 1 billion because it is 70 trillion frames per second.
Jesus. Just make up a number.
Yeah, that is so fast that they are able to sort of watch the behaviour of fundamental particles. It's that fast. So it's going to come in quite handy, they think, for examining.
Well, Bagsy not having to go through the rushes with that one.
Yeah, totally.
One thing I did want to say is that this is the second mention of the phrase solid state in this episode.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Willie mentions it in the previous segment when he's talking about the gas detector, and Baxter talks about it in context of this camera. I genuinely had no idea that the phrase solid state was a phrase that was used in the 70s. I assumed it was a phrase, not invented, but a phrase that's been popularized now because of, we talk about
SSDs,
solid state hard drives and stuff like that. Yeah, absolutely. So to hear it once was surprising. To hear it twice in the same episode, I was very surprised.
Yeah, I guess it's one of those things that makes sense. Because obviously you've got transistors and things like that, and microchips are all solid state.
Yeah.
I guess there are some phrases that are used and then go out of fashion and then come back into fashion. I think probably the most famous one being wireless. Everyone used to listen to the wireless.
Yeah. The wireless. And everything is wireless. Yeah. Very true. Very good, yeah.
Even if it's only a stick or a crutch, technology has always been able to offer some kind of strength and support to the handicapped. But today there's a greater awareness of the feeling a handicapped person may have of looking handicapped, a feeling that can be almost as damaging as the physical problem itself. Now, in 1880, some polio victims had to rely on devices like these to get around. Now, at least at that time, ladies wore long skirts, and these leg calipers weren't so obvious. But look at the knee joints on this appliance, for instance. They're ugly. I'll bet they were uncomfortable. And they're covered in bits and pieces of sharp metal which must have torn skirts and trouser legs. Now, the basic design of knee joints, even on this relatively modern caliper, it hasn't changed much in 50 years. Certainly it's hardly inconspicuous, particularly since one would have to wear a surgical shoe or a boot. Now, things are looking brighter, though. With the help of a grant from Action for the Crippled Child, the Institute of Orthopedics at Stanmore has produced the leg calipers that Gillian is wearing. Thank you. Now, 20 years ago, Gillian suffered an attack of polio which badly affected her right leg. Today, she has to wear calipers all the time and she can't walk without them. But compared with the old style, these new ones are much less obvious, and I bet they don't tear your clothes. Gillian, how long have you been wearing these calipers?
For nearly a year now.
What difference have you noticed?
Well, it's made a big difference to me. It's far lighter and so much less tiring for me. And it also means that I can actually go into a shop and buy a pair of shoes for the first time in my life. And this is a tremendous thrill.
Marvellous. Can you turn round so we can see the back? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Now, as Gillian was saying, the new calipers are about half the weight of the old ones. The steel supports are built into high-density plastic, which is moulded to the exact shape of the wearer's leg. Softer plastic is then used to build up a natural-looking leg here. The whole unit is washable, and it's stronger and less liable to break than the old ones, which often had to go back to be repaired. Perhaps it's not surprising to learn that some of the technicians who worked on this project are themselves polio victims. The Department of Health and Social Security is so impressed that they're arranging to set up a training centre at Stanmore to help people take advantage of this. You can see that there's one satisfied customer already.
Now, we've already suggested that Michael Rodd is in the pay of the British car industry. But so, in order to redeem ourselves, I would like to say that I think Michael Rodd is very much Tomorrow's World's champion of people with disability, isn't he?
Yes, he is. There are some strangely progressive comments that come out of his mouth. And it felt to me that obviously next week is the Holland special, which I'm sure at that point would have already been filmed, edited, in the bag, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it was definitely filmed during the winter, wasn't it? It was bloody freezing. So let's just see what they did in November. And I have a suspicion that he learned a lot from visiting Het Dorp. And learned a lot about the handicapped. I mean, you can imagine my anxiety and my nerves when it cut, when this segment immediately cuts to the leg calipers and Rod starts talking about the handicapped. And yet, at the heart of it is the idea that somehow there is a greater awareness of the feeling a handicapped person may have of looking handicapped, a feeling that can be almost as damaging as the physical problem itself. And he is nothing but respectful and kind throughout this whole piece.
Yeah.
Chapeau.
Now you say that, right? Why are you saying that? Obviously, the word why, the cartoon character, Andy Cap. Why was he called that?
I don't know. And I've never put the two things together until you just said it.
Because he wasn't, and he didn't play golf.
Yeah.
He wore a cap.
True. Well, to be fair, he couldn't see.
He wore a cap, but what's the pun there?
Because wasn't the brim of the hat way just like down to his nose? He couldn't see a thing, Russ.
I always thought it was weird when he turns up in The Simpsons because it absolutely blew me away that Americans would know who he was because
who Simpsons writers didn't know who he was. Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, we go way off subject there. These calipers, they look like devices of torture, don't they? I don't understand why even prior to the invention of this slightly nicer one that Rod shows us, why did they have to look like that they were gonna, chew your skin up and your knees?
I don't know, because the thing is, like, one assumes, we're putting this delicately, one assumes that in the past there would have been quite a high demand for calipers for polio victims because there was quite a lot of people who had polio. It's odd, isn't it? It almost looks like the kind of device you'd wear if you were an opus dei, and that you felt that you had to punish yourself, self-flagellize, because God has. I don't know. It's so odd. They look torturous. Yeah. There's no two ways about it. They're incredibly unpleasant. So it's lovely to see Gillian really enjoying her new leg caliper. And the fact that they've designed something that kind of thinks about comfort. I mean, I don't know what to say. It's astonishing in a weird way. Like it's obviously this is progressive, and like going back to what I was talking about tomorrow's world segments, like obviously this is definitely like you can see how things are going to get better. I suppose it just slightly breaks my heart that this was something to report.
Yes, yeah. Obviously at the time there was still plenty of, obviously much less polio about because vaccination had already been invented, but still, plenty of people who had polio when they were children. So there's still plenty of it about. And the charity that Rod talks about, he calls for Action for the Crippled Child. He calls it. Mm-hmm. He gets that wrong because the charity even then was actually called Action Research for the Crippled Child. So I'm not sure why he gets that. Why he misses that out. Obviously, that became a victim of his own success, really, because on the 50th anniversary of that charity, polio had become completely eradicated. The World Health Organization announced that it was formally eradicated. It was the 50th anniversary of that charity, which then had to change its name to Action Medical Research. And they're still around, but they don't look into polio anymore because it's basically been cured. So they look into other things that might affect children. There are still occasionally a few cases of polio, Mark. In 2022, do you know how many cases worldwide of polio there were?
300.
30.
Ah, okay.
30
good.
in just 3 countries. So, this is this is quite a nice thing. This invention doesn't really need to make it to the future because the use of it is no longer,
the need
is no longer there, which is quite, it's one of those rare occasions where it's a good thing that we don't. But you still can get, obviously the study of the field of medicine that this is called orthotics. And they still have to make calipers for people who have disability with their legs. This particular one is called a CAFO, knee, ankle, foot orthosis. It's called. But obviously, these days custom made. They don't look too dissimilar to those ones that Rod shows us at the end where they're shaped like the foot,
shaped the leg. Yeah.
Of course, because it's the future, they're made out of carbon fiber now, Mark. Just like
they are.
Racing cars.
Yeah,
and amateur submarines
and Titanic visiting submarines.
Yeah. And they still work pretty much the same. They're still manually operated. There have been some experiments to see whether they could do powered.
Aren't they leg operated?
Legally operated.
Legally operated.
There have been a few tests to try and make powered versions.
That feels like
cheating. It does feel like cheating. And also, I mean, if I was going to get, basically that's RoboCop territory, isn't it? So if you were going to get one, you would make sure that it had one of those holsters in it, in the thigh.
Yeah.
So you just put it. Yeah.
Well, how else am I supposed to shoot rapists in between a woman's legs?
So I think calipers would be very successful these days. Everybody'd have them if everybody still had polio, but they don't. So we don't need them.
Yeah. I think if you worked or ran a charity, surely the only true measure of success is having to disband it.
Actually, rather than moving on to new diseases, they should have just gone, our work here is done.
Job done. Yep.
We'll hand you, ladies and gentlemen, we hand you over to the cancer people. Or,
Yep.
That's what they should have done, really.
Cool.
Let's put me right off them now. Money-grabbing bastards.
Grifters, Russ. Grifters, a lot of them.
Right, I'm going to write them an email.
Indeed, yes. Already, many experts foresee the day when industry will grind to a halt for lack of raw material. So far, the accent has been on rare metals, the known reserves of which are indeed running out fast. But there may even be a problem with industry's bread and butter metal, mild steel. Now, the National Engineering Laboratory at East Kilbride exists to solve industrial problems, and to them, a possible shortage of mild steel arouses more than just mild interest.
In their search for a new source of supply, the researchers at NEL have recently turned to something that's been right under everybody's noses all the time, the tin can. 700,000 tons of them were thrown away last year. Most types of steel scrap can easily be melted down, but a can can't. It's not just steel, but tin, paper, paint, stale-baked beans, to name but a few of what the scrap trade calls pernicious contraries. But shredded and very roughly cleaned, tin cans are ready to take part in NEL's simple reclaiming process. The aim is to give them a new lease of life in their second incarnation as solid steel bars. Precise weighing divides the shreds into batches of 350 grams. A small-scale pilot processed this, more a feasibility study than a production line. No remelting is involved. In the first stage, the shreds are simply poured into a hydraulic press and given a rather firm squeeze. The process may be small-scale, but it takes a full-scale load to produce the necessary compression, about 100 tons. The result, a compacted billet of old baked bean tins with about 5/8 the density of pure steel. The impurities are still in there, but as the billet goes on to the next stage, a 1,000-degree furnace, they evaporate and actually help by creating an oxygen-free atmosphere. Next, another squeeze, this time a firmer one. The red-hot billet is bashed through a hole like metallic toothpaste, and the forces are so great that the metal knits together into a solid bar which can be worked in a normal lathe. It's not pure steel, not even strictly speaking a tin alloy, just an extremely compact metal mixture which is quite stable and strong enough for most engineering purposes. The surface of this test piece is contaminated with glass and graphite lubricant, but as the lathe cutting tool bites in, this shell is ripped away to reveal fresh and gleaming metal ready to go to work again. Under test, it's much the same as pure mild steel, yielding at about 20 tons per square inch. The engineers who designed this process are equally interested in the scrap that their new metal for old will itself generate once it goes back into industry. The bits that chip or curl off any metal when it's turned are called swarf. And swarf is Britain's biggest single industrial product. The scrap metal in it is worth an annual £30 million.
Hello, Bob. Hello, Jack.
But pernicious contraries tend to find their way into swarf too. It's usually a hodgepodge of metals and lubricants that's just not suitable for melting down. So like tin cans, it's almost worthless. But a handful of swarf can be pushed around in exactly the same way as a tin can to end up as it started. Or instead of squeezing the material to a bar, another form of instant alchemy NEL is considering is direct forging of simple and useful metal shapes like this prototype golf club head, made from what would once have been thrown away. So it looks like respectability at last for the tin can, and with £7 million worth being chucked away every year, perhaps it's about time.
Do you think that man has had his tetanus jab, Mark? That man who was so brazenly handling razor sharp
can handling
tin cans.
That
Was he just showing off for the camera?
I did not like.
Did he show over the camera? Or does he do that every day? Is that his part of his job? He just
he does that every. He does that every.
How
day.
thick is the skin on his hands?
I know it's horrible to describe to the listeners at home. He's just grabbing fistfuls of shards of ripped and torn tin cans.
Presumably not been cleaned
without
at
a
all.
care in the world.
Either. Probably could be
I
covered
doubt
in all
it.
sorts of.
No, there's a phrase, Russ, as we know, because actually I don't have a huge. I didn't think I had a huge amount to say about this particular segment, but I did like 3 new phrases.
Oh yeah.
Pernicious contraries, red hot billet, and swarf.
Yes.
And something tells me that the tin can shards he is just fisting were not cleansed of pernicious contraries.
He must have a tetanus jab for breakfast every morning, surely.
Yeah.
I mean, so obviously I've heard the words billet and swarf before. Pernicious contraries.
Oh, joy! What a brilliant!
Has narrator Derek Cooper come up with that, or is that an official? Is that an official piece?
No, I had to look it up. I had to look it up, Russ, and it is a genuine phrase that is actually employed to mean what he uses it for. Because I've never heard of it. It's like it's just a joyous combination of 2 words you don't really use quite as often as you should do. And what a powerful couple they make.
Makes me think of the Vermicious Gnids from Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. It's another one of those narrated segments, so it's a bit kind of slightly information filmy.
There's not a huge amount here.
And also, I just don't think this is a good way of recycling. In my mind, if you're going to recycle metal, you get a big pile of it and then put it in a furnace until it melts. And then once it's melted, then turn it into something else.
Yeah.
They seem to be steadfastly refusing to do that here. I don't know why.
They 100% have the technology to do it. They plain just
no,
don't
what they want to do is just
anything other than
just batter it into like tiny little like nugget. Well, not tiny, but like fairly small nuggets. Just like battering it together, and then making what must be a spurious claim that it's just as strong as regular steel, which it can't be because it's made out of little bits hammered together. It's like saying chipboard is as strong as mahogany. Like it's not. Yeah. It can't be because it doesn't have. It has loads of points of weakness in it. Surely.
This whole segment is littered with inconsistency, possibly like the billets themselves. He talks about how I think the tin can material has a value of £30 million, which obviously in 1973 was, I mean, it's a lot of money now, but 1973 was a lot of money. It has a value of £30 million, but then he continues on to say that it's almost worthless. At one point he says, at the beginning of the VO, he says there are 700,000 tons of tin cans that were thrown away. I'm assuming it's imperial tons. I don't know. I've spelled
They're
it
fairly
NS,
close to each
not
other
NES.
anyway.
They're fairly close, yeah. But then later on, he says that 7 million pounds of tin can are thrown away. I do not know if they are in any way similar numbers. My instinct tells me they are not. And again, it's just like all these inconsistencies that are just thrown around. It's like, it's a very odd thing, and at the heart of it, obviously, is just an idea that just it doesn't seem to have any legs. Because I would have thought, like, surely all the metal from tin cans could be used for something, but you'd have to melt it down and repurpose it. Like it goes without saying. In a weird way, it's like they're trying to put a huge amount of effort into being as lazy as possible.
Yeah, but at the scale they're working,
maybe I've just summed up British industrial policy in the 1970s.
It's like the scale they're working on there. There's no indication of how they're going to scale that up.
No.
At the moment, they've got a man grabbing fistfuls of chopped up can, putting them in a cup on his own, and then they're putting it through a high pressure hammer thing and making something the size of an egg cup, roughly.
Yeah, or like a kind of a tumbler. Yeah,
and then doing loads of work on that. But there's no indication of how they're going to scale that up to the £7 million or whatever
or 700,000 tons, whichever is larger. And to what purpose? They never actually explain what the metal can be used for. They explain some of its values, but they also are at pains to point out that it isn't steel. It's actually not even a tin alloy, which means that it is just shit tin.
I mean, again, there's some fairly interesting imagery in it. There's the bit where the man's grabbing the can, and it seems to be filmed with a handheld camera, and this fella who's doing it looks for all the world like he's in a 90s indie band, doesn't it?
Yeah, he really does. 100%.
It did look a bit like a 90s indie video for that small segment there. And there's a nice bit of business where they're following the man carrying the wheelbarrow full of scrap, and then a fella walks past and just throws his fag packet in there to demonstrate the idea of contaminants.
Russ, a pernicious
contrary.
a
pernicious contrary, yes. Yeah. Might start using that. How can we use waiter? There's a pernicious contrary in my soup.
Yeah.
Nigel Farage complaining about too many pernicious contraries arriving on the coast of Dover.
Absolutely.
There's all sorts of things you use it for, isn't there? I just need to flush this again because there's a pernicious contrary in there.
What a sophisticated man you are. Hold on.
But I mean, metal recycling, Mark. The National Engineering Laboratory, which is where they are doing these experiments. It's no longer the National Engineering Laboratory.
Privatised?
Thatcher!
Yeah, knew it.
Thatcher decided to basically privatise all of our national laboratories and succeeded in some way or another. They didn't all get fully nationalised, but this...
I see Porton Down hasn't been nationalised, but everything other than that...
This one was sold to a German company called TÜV-Süd, and it's still there. But they don't do anything about metal recycling anymore. They do something to do with like the gas flow or something. But you can still pay it a visit if you like. I doubt you're allowed to smoke on site like that fella anymore. But tin can. I thought, I know what we could talk about. Tin cans, Mark. Tin cans. They reckon it was invented by a Frenchman, the tin can originally. A Frenchman called Philippe de Girard. But he was a nobleman in France, so was not particularly popular in France back in the day, because this was in the late 1700s. So he made friends with an Englishman called Peter Durand in London. And he went, Peter, I've come up with this great idea for tin cans. Can you patent it for me? And Peter went, okay, I'll do that. So it got patented in England first. But Durand distrusted the whole thing, wasn't particularly interested in it. So he sold the patent following year to two fellas called Brian Donkin and John Hall. And they opened the world's first tin canning facility in Bermondsey in London. And it was actually very, very successful. Incidentally, Brian Donkin is a name we should be more famous than he is. Because not only did he make the world's first ever paper making machine, but he also was the man who helped Charles Babbage build his difference engine. So he was involved in the building of the first ever computer, as we discussed last episode. So all I'm saying is that, if you're in early Victorian times and you want to invent something, put a Donkin on it. That's what I'm saying.
Put a Donkin on it.
Anyway.
Oh, mate, you got to put a Donkin on it.
Yeah, so obviously the original cans, they were made of wrought iron, but they had to coat them in tin, which is where the name tin can comes from, because tin doesn't rust, whereas obviously iron and steel does. Put the old tin coating on there. But they were welded shut with lead solder, Mark. With delicious, lovely, yummy lead solder.
Yeah.
Which obviously no one gave a shit about back then. So there are reports that perhaps maybe people who went on long expeditions who ate a lot of it might have got a little bit mad. But I don't think there's any confirmed, proven incidents of it being that bad. Because it was quite expensive back then to have tin cans. So the two main buyers of them were the military and explorers, because they're the two, like the lot that actually needed preserved food, And they found some original tin cans that were made in 1829. They found them in the Arctic. And they opened them in 1939 and tasted what was inside, and it was still just as delicious as when it was.
Yummers!
Yeah, just as delicious. Yeah, delicious, nutritious.
Deliciously leady.
110 years later, Mark. So that's
wow.
Yeah, there is actually there's a whole YouTube channels, isn't there, of people getting like old rations and old tins and things and eating. What a strange existence that must be.
Says you doing this.
But I think probably quite a famous fact, Mark, about tin cans is that the tin can opener, despite the tin can being invented, patented in 1810, the first ever can opener wasn't patented until 1855. So they went 45 years without having any ability to open these things. So what they used to do is if they were in the army, they just used their bayonets to open. And then if they weren't in the army, they didn't have a bayonet, they just smash them open with rocks. which I find quite funny. Like, you think they would have come up with something better than that in 45 years. But yeah,
can open it.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing that it made me think about: when was the last time you opened one of those cans? I always found it really exciting when I was younger. The old like corned beef style or tinned hamster
with the little
you get
rolling
the key
key thing,
and you put it on there and you undo it.
I don't remember. When I was 7, maybe.
So exciting, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
I think more cans should have that. Obviously, these days we have as a general rule, they're basically ring pulls now, aren't they? Primarily.
Yeah.
And it did get me thinking. When I do occasionally buy a can that doesn't have a ring, and I have to use do it the old-fashioned way with a can opener, I am incredibly bad as an adult at opening cans with a can opener. Invariably, it goes wrong in some. Now, have can openers got worse? Have I lost the ability to open cans? Because when I was a kid, I used to be able to open cans no problem at all, ever. Like I could open, just get myself soup or beans or something for lunch. Open a can with a can opener. Never had an issue whatsoever. These days, every time I ever try and use a can opener, it goes wrong. Have I forgotten how to open cans? Or a can opener's not working anymore? Or a can stronger?
I would argue that you're just completely out of practice.
I think that's what it is.
And I think I would assume when you come across a can that doesn't have the ring pull system, you panic because you don't know how to open it.
All fingers and thumbs.
All fingers and thumbs. Here's a question though: Do you use the can opener vertically or horizontally?
Well, I always forget which way round to use it. That's the thing. That's part of the problem.
Surely it's dealer's choice.
Is it? Can you use it both ways?
Yeah, of course you can.
Either way, it doesn't seem to work properly anymore. I don't know. It's weird.
I don't remember the last time I had to use a can opener.
It tends to be.
It sits in a drawer.
It tends to be if I buy some, if you buy like chickpeas or something like that, and you buy the ones that are from some sort of Asian brand or that are not the supermarket own brand, they quite often don't have the ring pulls on it, so you have to use a can opener. I don't know. I'm going to blame the can openers, Mark. I don't think they're as sharp as they used to be. That's my opinion.
Yep. Yeah. It's definitely everyone else for us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anyway, steel is the world's most recycled material. 85% of all steel gets recycled at the end of its life. So, at the end of its use, 85%, that's loads, isn't it?
That's very impressive, actually.
Yeah. And because of that, steel cans are the world's most recycled packaging. In Europe, 79.5% of all steel cans are recycled. Obviously, in America, boo, only 63% are recycled. Presumably, they're, flushing the rest down their toilet.
Well, they're shooting them off
chucking
fences.
it in those terrifying sinks they have that chew everything up.
Oh, God. Yeah, thank God we never got those.
But yeah, you'll be surprised to hear, Mark, that they don't crush the bits of can together and try and turn them into
red hot billets. No.
Do you know what they do, Mark? Have a guess.
Do they melt?
Yeah, they melt them down in a giant furnace, Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's exactly what they do. Yeah.
Does seem like the obvious choice.
Yeah. And obviously, the one last thing I need to point out about this episode is Baxter's outro there. He tells us about Holland.
Yeah, and what does he do, Russ?
It's almost like that stall is spring-loaded, Mark, because...
Yeah, he is ejected from the show with alacrity. He does not hang about whatsoever. No. Hey, Raymond, don't go changing.
No, absolutely. There's probably a frosty G&T waiting for him in the BBC bar, isn't there?
Absolutely. In the Tomorrow's World Star bar.
And that's it, Mark. Not much else to say about that episode.
Fantastic. No, it's good. Yeah, as you say, it was like a classic kind of meat and gravy episode. Loved it. Especially on the back of the last one.
Yeah, sometimes it's nice to have such a straightforward thing to look at, isn't it?
With nary a distraction.
No.
So, shall we? Should we crunch those numbers?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Let's do it. So go on then. Let's look at the year in context. 1973. Do you want to tell us about the cinema box office?
Well, what I realised, Mark, is there's a couple of things happening here.
It'll be the same.
As the
same as episode 25 or 20.
Exactly,
or
same as the Holland one. And B, we don't really have the numbers,
yeah.
so it's not like it would change week to week. So one thing, but what I did look at was the US box office, and the noticeable thing. I didn't realise this. Poseidon Adventure, Mark, in America, the Poseidon Adventure, it went to number 1 in the box office on the 27th of December 1972, and it remained at number 1 until the 21st of March 1973, apart from 2 weeks when The Getaway went to number 1 and it was in number 2. But other than that, number 1 in the box office all the way until then. I knew it was a popular film. I had no idea it was that popular. I didn't know it was like the Bryan Adams of of disaster films.
Are we in the era of the wide release? Or is that when it would be in New York and Los Angeles and then it would tour the country?
I don't know.
So that like this, like you'd have, I don't know, like it would open in a new, I don't know, gosh, that's still, I mean, regardless of either way of crunching the numbers, that's hugely impressive. So it was number 1 for 3 weeks, basically.
I have to say,
sorry, 3 months.
I watched it when I was a kid, but I haven't watched it as an adult. I don't know whether it still holds up.
I mean, I doubt it. I mean, hey, write and complain, but I doubt it. I mean, like the boat ends up upside down, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't that that's the conceit?
There's a comedian in it. Is it? It's like Don. It's either Don Rickles or it's one of the little fellas.
Look it up. One of the little fellas. Bobby Ball.
Yeah, it's Bobby Ball. Yeah. Oh, Red Buttons. That's who it is.
Oh, yeah. No, I wouldn't have pulled that in a 1,000 years. Okay, so that's interesting. God, 3 months. That's incredible. Pop charts. Which is probably very similar to episode 20 or 25.
There's some good stuff on here. Number 10, Ballpark Incident by Wizard. Number 9, If You Don't Know Me By Now by Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. Number 8, Wishing Well by Free. Number 7, Part of the Union by Straubs. Number 6, Daniel by Elton Hercules John. Number 5, The Gene Genie by David Bowie. Number 4, Long-Haired Lover from Liverpool by Little Jimmy Osmond. Number 3, You're So Vain by Carly Simon. Number 2, Do You Want to Touch Me, brackets, Oh Yeah, by Gary Glitter. I think I'll give that a pass, Gary. I don't think I do want to touch me, actually. And number 1, Blockbuster by Sweet.
That's a lovely chart, with the exception of one obvious thing.
What do you reckon Bob Holness is? Do you preferred Baker Street, which he played saxophone on, or do you think he preferred Blockbuster by Sweet because it had the name?
Oh, he preferred Baker Street because he got all those sweet residues.
Of course. Yeah.
Prices?
Gallon of petrol, 39 pence. Bottle of whiskey, £2.45. Pint of beer, 18.5 pence. 20 fakes, 26.5 pence. Pint of milk, 5.5 pence. They love their half pences, don't they? Why don't they just round it?
They
Round
do.
it. 22-inch colour TV, £208.90. Large loaf of bread, 11.5 pence. Daily Mirror, threepence. Average house price, £9,000. Half a pound of Lurpak, 10.5 pence. Can of Coke, 5.5 pence. Ford Cortina, an unblown up Ford Cortina, £1,075. Golden Wonder crisps, 2.5 pence.
How much did your Cortina cost?
£800.
Gosh.
And that was in 2002, I think. 2001, 2002? 2002, I think.
And how much do you reckon it would cost now?
It would be worth about 10, 12 grand.
Yeah, it would be, wouldn't it? Yeah, easily. Yeah. To be fair, yours was
it was a beauty.
It was a beauty. It was a beauty. Argos catalogue?
Well,
is that around here? I can never remember. I never remember when the Argos catalogue begins.
The Argos catalogue begins here because this is issue 1 of the Argos catalogue, Mark.
Oh, so it'll be the same as the Holden special. Go on then.
It's the Sona automatic electric kettle, stainless steel with teak handle, capacity 3 pints, BEAB approved. Recommended retail price £10.62. Argos price £7.45.
What a bargain! What a bargain! That's fabulous. And magazine covers, Russ.
This is actually an interesting one. This one, Mark. New Scientist has got a picture of 2 old fellas, like really old looking fellas on it, standing on like a lovely verdant mountainside in the I think the Andes, I guess, and the headline is "Born 1830 and still going strong." Right? I went, hang on a minute, let's do the maths there. This is 1973. New Scientist suggesting this man is 143 years old.
Yeah.
So I looked into it, and I actually read the article because old New Scientists are actually on Google, so you can read the whole issues. So I actually read the article. It's a remarkably credulous article where they just believe that there's all these old fellas. There's this village called Vilcabamba in Ecuador. And there's loads of old people there. I mean, it's a very healthy. Obviously, it's a mountain. They eat well. A lot of old people there, and they all claim to be over 100. And the oldest one there claims to be 143. But there's a load of them there. Some of them claim to be 130. Some of them claim to be 100. And this New Scientist article just believes them. And obviously, I then looked into what's the opinion now, because we don't talk about these 140-year-old people anymore. Yeah. It's normally that French woman who smoked loads of fags who lived to 120, isn't it? Yeah. But it turns out that they later did studies. It turns out that all the old men in that village are just complete bullshitters. they just actually did this, and it turns out that they had this weird tradition, like this sort of weird arms race, where the older you were, the more respect you got. So as they got older, they would just exaggerate how old they were, and the older they got, the more they would exaggerate how old they were. So the scientists would go there and speak to a fella, and he'd say, "Oh, I'm 110," and then they go back a year later, and he'd go, "Oh, I'm 118." Just completely make it up. That's fantastic. And they did some proper, I don't know exactly how you actually scientifically test how old someone is. You cut them open and count the rings or whatever. But they did determine that actually the oldest man in that village was actually only 96, and most of them were just in their 80s. Even though they're, it's good going, but it is. It's not 140. Yeah. So I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah, that is very interesting.
Scientific American obviously is not interesting. It's just got a picture of, I don't know what that is. It's like an old pattern from olden times, and it says Judaism at the time of Christ. That's not even scientific, really, is it?
No.
It's more religious. No. Anyway, popular science pulls it out of the bag, though. It's got a picture of a man taking a photograph with a Polaroid camera. 10 colour shots in 20 seconds. The inside story on the hard-to-believe pocket Polaroid camera.
I'm going to not believe that.
I mean, there's all sorts of exciting stuff inside as well. You've got two-way cable TV, how to install and maintain a home humidifier, hydrogen, fuel of the future, and snowshoe backpacking. So plenty to be
in that's that. Cool. Yeah, lots to get your teeth into.
Time magazine has a lovely caricature of your old pal Tricky Dicky.
Yeah, big fan.
Got his hand on the Bible, got his hand up there. Nixon 2, Beyond Vietnam. They spelled Vietnam as 2 words there. Was that the standard?
That was the thing that people did, yeah. I don't think it was standard, but there was this thing that people did.
Private Eye. It must have been cold at the time because it's The Freeze. Britain Can Take It. And then it has what looks like maybe a pastiche of an old painting, but and it's got like loads of people all passed out on the floor. And there's one of them saying, if this is phase 2, God knows what phase 3 will be like.
Brilliant. Love it. Love how satire just really is timeless.
Yeah. Playboy, I'd say it's absolutely outrageous, this Playboy, Mark. And it shows how times change. So it's quite interesting. It's like of course it's a special holiday anniversary issue. But the main image is of the Playboy bunny, but it's a collage. The Playboy bunny is actually cut out of felt. He's wearing a very nice sort of 1970s sort of John Travolta style disco suit, wide collared disco suit. But it's all like it's like a real collage. But he's opening his Christmas present, and lo and behold, Mark, his Christmas presents are 5 framed pictures of nudie ladies.
Nudie ladies.
However, what I think is quite shocking, and what you would never see these days, is that these nudie ladies are completely nips out. On the front cover. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Wow.
I don't know whether was this only mail ordered at the time. I can't imagine this would fly on the top shelf of W.H. Smith's or whatever, would it? Or was 1973 such a open society that you could just have jubblies on display in your local newsagent? I don't know.
I find that very surprising. Yeah. I mean, I only read it for the
articles. I mean, there's an article by Jermaine Greer inside. Interesting.
Oh.
But yeah, well, that's it really for the magazines.
Well, thank you very much. Let's audit the shit out of this episode then, Russ. Yeah. And we'll start with the first question, which is most important invention.
Well, I'm gonna say, I think
the gas.
Well, the thing with the gas detector is it definitely works. But have you ever lived in a house with a gas detector?
No.
Because you can smell gas.
Yeah.
So
25 explosions a year shows that the smell is enough normally for most people. Similar issue with the leg calipers, because obviously that is a real good development, but of course polio's done, isn't it? It almost feels like why couldn't you have done this before? I don't know. What is the most important?
The slow motion. Without the slow motion camera, we wouldn't have had the films of Zack Snyder.
Yeah, very true. But does he use this camera? Because this is what we have to deal with.
I'm going to say, God, let's give it to leg calipers, Mark.
Yeah, all right. It is the right choice. Most worthless invention.
Well, it's the car.
There's a long queue outside my door.
It's the car wiring, isn't it?
It has to be. That's it. I mean, in an episode littered with bollocks, that is right. I should stop swearing. That is right up there. Most inaccurate prediction of the future.
Britain winning the Cod Wars.
I was going to say the same thing, but I was thinking he doesn't quite say they're going to win it, but he does. Baxter does act like as you say, it's like our Vietnam.
Not really much in the way of prediction of the future. I guess the car wiring again is kind of predicting that improved cars didn't.
Is it that British Leyland or a major British manufacturer? Maybe it's the fish farms, only in the sense that the promise at the end of that is basically we're going to lure all of the North Sea's fish into British harbours by dropping chemicals into the sea. And I know I'm kind of stretching what they say, but it's definitely what they imply.
Yeah, totally.
And of course, there's absolutely same with because I'd swear in the episode where we talk about the sonar fish shepherding, that was also the least accurate prediction because fish will not be tamed. There's no two ways about it. They are intractable at best.
Yeah.
Where's screw up? It's got to be Mushmouth
Rods. Yeah. I wonder. I can't remember when did we say that he started this program? Maybe this is one of his earlier episodes.
I was wondering that. I was hoping you'd tell me. Yeah, he must be relatively new. So it must be. Yeah, he must be known.
72. They reckon he started.
72. Okay, so realistically, he's been in the job less than a year. So maybe that's what it is. But yeah, it's odd. It's strangely on him. Best attempt at making something boring interesting. It's got to be the fish pheromones, really, for me, because that is just a horror film.
Yeah.
Then again, the tin can stuff is completely unworthy of the production values they employ on it.
I mean, I guess that one fella in the tin can thing is making his boring life interesting by playing Russian roulette with diseased, rusty old cans.
Which we know are soldered with lead. Okay, I'll agree with you on that one. It's that one guy. Best use of music?
There is no music in this.
There isn't, is there? I can't think of a single piece.
I think the only closest thing to music is that beautiful explosion.
Oh, that is good. Well, let's when I type this up, I'll put in brackets that beautiful explosion because that is music. Best or worst use of furniture?
There's also no furniture in this unless you count gas cooker.
which I don't, or car seats, which I don't. And no furniture at all. God, no, there isn't. There's not a single piece. God, that's disappointing, isn't it? Most notable clothing?
What stood out to me is Willy Wooly's lovely roll neck sweater.
Willy Wooly is Wooly, yeah, absolutely. It's a joy to behold. Did we see anything in this episode that made it into the future?
Well, I mean...
It's more the opposite, really, isn't it? It's more... The most notable thing in this episode is something that didn't make it into the future, which is polio.
Yeah.
The idea of gas safety...
there's...
made it in, but the gas detector, you're right, you don't have those in your home.
You could have one if you wanted it. You can
but
buy
you
them.
could, yeah, absolutely, yeah. But they're not littering our kitchens.
No.
Slow motion cameras obviously did slow motion photography. Obviously, I suppose strictly speaking, like we've all got one in our pockets these days, haven't we? We've all got like a camera that is 1/3 as good as this. You know, I suppose if you dilute, you know, car wine didn't. Yeah, okay, cool. So I suppose we say gas detectors and the slow motion camera. Yeah. What does this episode tell us about the 31st of January 1973?
Not particularly exciting time.
No.
I mean, maybe everyone's worn out after both Vietnam and the Cod Wars. That's really taken it out of everyone. They're all kind of feeling a little bit lackluster. I don't know.
A weary nation
Yes.
wants only to consider bad car wiring. Yeah, it is a bit kind of lackluster, isn't it? Actually, that's a good phrase, isn't it? It's all a bit like because meat and potato or whatever you want to call it, but it is kind of it's lacking inspiration. Maybe that's what it's telling us about this particular period. It's lacking inspiration.
Yeah, I know. We sometimes say that tomorrow's world was ruined by the internet.
The internet.
But I do think there's something to be said that without a little bit of a sprinkle of computeryness, it can be a bit too basic. I think because we're pre-computer here, it's a little bit a little bit basic.
Actually, yeah, and maybe there's a bigger gap between iconic developments than there might be 10, 20 years later. Like, actually, you have to... Let's forgive Michael Rodd, and let's say that they had no choice but to put the British Leyland wiring on the show, because otherwise he'd had
yeah. Right, and he had no beer money either for that week.
Which was unacceptable. So let's look at the tropes then. So presenter having to speak over a louder sound. I don't think there is.
Because when there is a louder sound, it's done with it's mainly Derek doing a voiceover, which doesn't count. But also, actually, the one really loud sound, no one speaks over. They allow it to breathe, and then the one thing that should sound loud is really quiet, which is the detector. So that's a no. Something to do with oil rigs? Nothing to do with oil rigs. A suspiciously obvious brand name in the ad-free BBC. No. I mean,
couldn't think of any. No, you did. You filled in some gaps, but it's not there. No, it's not there. Clear and blatant lying. I'm going to go with yes. I think Willy Wooly lies about being in some old hag's kitchen.
Yeah, I'll go with that.
Yep, there are no evil farmers, to the best of mine. Well, no, there are no, because I was thinking there's some animal cruelty, but that's not the same as evil farmers, is it? There is casual sexism, thanks to Willy Wooly again. No items presented from a gantry. There's plenty of gantry teasing. Episode ends in a damp squib. The tin can recycling?
Is it any damper than the rest of the programme, though?
No, that's a good point. You're right. That's how you measure it.
It's pretty consistent with the rest of the programme.
Comparing it to what came before. Yeah. Woollard and McCann abroad or common in a small European town?
No. Woollard is definitely in Britain there, I think. Unless he's on LV4... Was it LV426?
Oh, well remembered. Yeah, absolutely. Lasers?
No.
Magnets? No.
Yes.
Boats?
There was a boat in the fish segment.
Oh, yes. Oh, very good. Thank God for that. Otherwise, this was going to be the lowest ever. Baxter buggers off.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Glad we added that one.
And travel to Shepherd's Bush.
No, I don't think so. No. If only we still had that cougar. I could have added that. No.
I have a suspicion that might be one of the lowest we've ever had in terms of the tropes. Well, that's it. I mean, if we sound a bit down, it's just because it's a good quality episode, but it didn't have the heights, or the valleys that we love to walk through, Russ. It was
straight and narrow.
It was all plateau.
Narrow.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? That's okay, because the last episode was rich with oh god, what are those lines in the map called? Contour lines. Rich. Yeah. The only thing left I have to say is that, unfortunately, Russell, I have to inform you that as of the recording of this episode, there are now only 1,378 episodes of Tomorrow's World for us to audit, which if I didn't know better, I'd say that number was shrinking every single time I mention it.
We barely have a surfeit of episodes left, Mark.
That's true. Oh, I don't know what we'll do. We'll have to think of something else to do in the meantime. Then, when we run out of episodes. Thank you, Russ.
Oh well, thank you, Mark. And well, I'm gonna have to leave you now because
oh gosh, I hope everything's all right.
I don't know whether you can smell that over the old Zoom there, but it's definitely a smell. It's kind of like a mixture of asparagus wee, and bad breath, and animal feces. No. I think I'm gonna have to. I think I have to go and investigate it, Mark. Luckily, I've got this big Zippo lighter in my hand, so I'll probably just use that to go and explore the dark crevices of my kitchen. So, so we'll have to leave you now, and well, until next time, when hopefully we'll have a more exciting episode to bring you. It's goodbye from both of us, and well, if you are on the internet, we will see you tomorrow.
Bye.